Deep within the bedrock of Holy Terra, far below the shine of the Emperor's golden throne room and the clamor of scribal wings, where the bureaucrats endlessly documented the affairs of humanity's sprawling Imperium, lay hidden a chamber that might never have existed at all, known to fewer souls than stars in a void storm. Hewn eons ago from raw planetary stone, long before apes conceived of tools or gazed skyward, this rough-hewn sanctuary had guarded profane secrets since before the galaxy convulsed in the Horus Heresy. Here, Magos Historicus Gaul dedicated his life to the forbidden, surrounded by relics and treatises so perilous that to the fiery eyes of the Ordo Hereticus, they demanded instant purgation by cleansing flame. Only the shy, dancing glow of a single oil lamp held back the total darkness, a tongue of fire that shivered visibly each time the decrepit ventilation systems far above roused the thick, centuries-old air, casting restless shadows over walls crammed with dark wood shelves. These held volumes bound in materials that unnerved the fingers' leathered hides resembling skin stitched with unnatural precision, metals that drank the light, spines inscribed in the angular, wicked sigils of utterances long since silenced. With a soft creak of antique spectacles perched precariously on his nose, Gaul eased back into the embracing familiarity of his deep chair. A relic gifted long ago by an inquisitor whose perilous ignorance he had assuaged with a sliver of carefully preserved truth, its leather groaned softly under his increasingly brittle frame, molded over decades to the specific curve of his spine. His hands, spiderwebbed with the brown maps of dried ink, speckled with acid burns and paper cuts whispering of constant communion with decaying knowledge, traced the edge of his desk. His fingertip found the tiny mechanical eagle he had carved there, a private symbol etched in moments of weary faith. The air hung thick with the scent of decaying papyrus and ancient bindings, folded through with the sharp, bitter tang of recaf bubbling diligently in an overworked warming unit atop a grimy heater plate. Such warmth was a profound indulgence in these ascetic confines. Gaul's ritual included a sly twist, a stolen pinch of herbs smuggled from some distant agri-shielded paradise deep within the Ultramar system. Their subtle, forgotten fragrance clover and nameless sun-warmed blossoms always summoned the ghost of his mother's terraced herb garden, high on a hive spire long since reduced to cinder and toxic ruin. That aroma, woven into the steam rising from his mug, was a frail tether to peace amidst the crushing weight of his duty. He reached for the chipped and cherished vessel, lovingly mended time and again. It was a wanderer like him, traveling decades through imperial service. He poured the thick, dark liquid, watching silvery coils of vapor rise and fray like souls escaping into the perpetual subterranean chill that seemed to seep up from the bedrock itself. The first scalding sip, as ever, drew a faint, genuine smile onto his deeply lined face. It was a touchstone, this daily comfort, connecting his obscure and perilous labor to the humble routines of billions across the star-scattered Imperium workers rising to tool benches, soldier squads clanking cups before muster calls. A dull ache throbbed up his spine as he stretched, vertebrae grinding like shifting continental plates beneath his scholar's weight. Hours hunched over treacherous texts invited the subterranean dampness to settle deep within his marrow, a constant, familiar companion to his lifetime's pilgrimage down into forbidden memory. He pulled the frayed blanket draped over the chair back tighter across his hunched shoulders, a threadbare shield against the insidious cold. Laid out before him, seeming almost luminous in the tight circle of lamplight, were the ghosts that occupied his present. Fragile scroll fragments dredged from the ossified tombs of a space hulk wandering out of the howling void, bearing the impossible confluence of elegant Eldari curves and the stark, petrified geometries unmistakably Necron. Most of the Hulk's gruesome bounty had vanished instantly into the hypercar holds of competing Ordos, but these slips of nieternal vellum had reached him through a labyrinth of unseen couriers and dead drops so profoundly Byzantine that even Gaul dared not speculate on their tortuous path. Beside these alien whispers rested the sturdy tome of his own lifetime labor, bound in plain, dark leather worn smooth as river stone by years of handling. Its cover bore no proud title, no vaunted author, only a small, enigmatic glyph, Gaul's own cipher for the mysterious precursors. It resembled a reptilian eye, slitted and wise, yet also hinted at a vortex, a doorway yawning open onto dimensions folded beyond human comprehension. Within were stratified recordings of accreted evidence and heresies, but also Gaul's own profound meditations wrestling with the crushing insignificance of humanity, stumbling blindly through cosmic ruins wrought by minds of an incomprehensible order. Tonight, the burden felt heavier, the summation of the old ones. His quill hovered, hungry and hesitant, over the pure surface of a waiting vellum sheet. Centuries of research congealed in his mind, yet words felt absurdly blunt tools to grasp beings for whom time was a mountain range to be walked. How encapsulate a vanished race whose footprint shaped the very chaos humanity now drowned in? How describe a conflict that ripped the calm sea between stars into the inferno-screamed warp? How frame the fall of entities who danced with life, death, space, time, as effortlessly as Gaul now stirred herbs into his brew? There seemed a terrible audacity in the act. Yet the comforting cadences of his existence held him steady. The soft scratching of the oversized raven quill as it began to drink ink, the rhythmic heartbeat thumping from his ancient chronometer, the reassuring kettle song rumble from the recaf pot. High above, on planets painted crimson by the Emperor's wars, uncountable legions battled Xeno's horrors, and twisted heretics in a struggle echoing Galileo's ticking chronometer, counting down eternal oblivion. But here, deep below, in this fragile bubble of dust, lamplight, and quiet defiance, one loyal servant of the throne lifted his pen. He pressed the nib to parchment, scratching the first fragile marks, refusing to let the memory of the architects crumble entirely into forgotten dust. To chronicle the hands that first laid the stones of the galaxy against which humanity now beat its desperate fists. Millions upon millions of years passed, when the primordial annihilator slept and the fires of newborn stars cooled over nascent worlds raw as wounds. Consciousness first stirred in the cold, slow pulses. The apex predators of meaning, the old ones, awakened. The universe, vast and indifferent and silent, found its first proper gaze. Sentience, as an organized fire, burned bright in them, approximately 60 million Terran years ago. Not taught, not granted, but a slow accretion of understanding evolving through silent millennia before any other sapient creature crawled shivering onto any forgotten shore. Theirs were the first minds to comprehend not just what an object was, but the terrifying possibility of why it might be. They alone, in that pre-dawn darkness, looked upon the tapestry of stars not as mere points of light, but as destinations, as questions demanding answers. Existence itself held its first purposeful breath. In the Imperium, where the nightmares of trillions would later boil eternal, then, a mirror lake, dead calm, pristine, undisturbed by the psychic effluent of countless frantic souls burdened only with brief, bright calendars. The old ones were the first to brush its surface, to map its currents, to harness its potential. Their mastery began there. Their biology, sculpted over geological eras before any competitor species had even begun its first awkward stumbling steps, echoed the vast, deliberate ticking in their reptilian minds. Their forms were fortresses of endurance and efficiency, designed for the long, long run. Taller than common humanoids, their scaled sentinel bodies housed brains of staggering complexity, not merely processing data, but existing simultaneously across dimensions. Their senses brushed both realms, the tactile reality of stone and star, and the fluid tides of the Imperium, perceiving the universe as a single, rippling membrane. Patterns invisible to minds blinkered by mortality were as clear to them as spiderwebs glistening with dew at dawn. Lost fragments of Eldari texts whispered of their unblinking eyes of ancient knowing, deep as galactic cores. Where later peoples faced frail, disease-haunted captures inhabiting weak and temporary vessels, the old one flesh was made of endurance. Patience became the bedrock of all they wrought, slow, cold-blooded wisdom, as ancient accounts named it. A biological imperative towards deliberation fueling immortal lifespans that redefined time. While fleeting mortals measured their frantic breaths in years, decades, fleeting victories and bitter failures stark as signal flares, the old one lived in the slow rhythm of continents drifting. Mountains to them were fleeting geological hiccups. Stellar empires flared like fireworks forgotten before the smoke even cleared. They possessed the profound, weighty perspective of watching a planetary forest not just mature, but fossilize under their steady gaze. This patient flow bled into every facet of their civilization. A single technological innovation, a melody worthy of centuries, perfected note by resonant note. Genetic engineering, strains teased into existence over millennia, like gardeners coaxing perfect blooms across ages. Philosophy, questions contemplated for eons until answers formed like continents from primordial seas. Where other species clawed towards good enough, their relentless, unhurried diligence achieved the impossible, perfection. Their foresight reached into futures millennia distant, planning celestial chains of cause and effect, and possessing the monumental fortitude to simply wait for their meticulously crafted designs to blossom. Their colonization unfolded like root systems, patient, interconnected growth across the galactic face. Aggression burned scarce as air on dead moons. They were cultivators, architects, their ambitions expressed through fostering life, not crushing it. The secret artery binding their scattered realm was the Webway, that miraculous interdimensional lattice woven taut between the flesh of real space and the seething potential of the Imperium. Original masters, architects supreme, they wove corridors stretching across impossible gulfs. Ancient verses speak of them dancing across parsecs with a single seamless step, their essential mastery making them not merely travelers, but princes navigating the starseed. A structure of governance bloomed under them, fundamentally alien to those greed-terrified empires that rose feverishly in their wake. While later powers enforced order with the gun, and the autoda-fe empires fueled by dogma and fear, the Old Ones built an empire without masters, a dominion nurtured by boundless generosity. Stewardship, not suppression. They declared themselves not lords but gardeners. They saw the galactic cradle not as theirs to possess, but as theirs to uplift towards an unknown yet beautiful fruition. Their foundational belief, every life form, every spark of consciousness, woven a thread into the invaluable tapestry of the cosmic whole. Diversity was cherished strength, conformity a species' failure. From scant ruins salvaged from impossible depths and texts half dissolved by epical erosion, their society takes ethereal shape, not ruled from summits but woven by consensus. No emperors knelt to, no tyrants wielding absolute command over screaming legions. Instead, they moved via shared cognizance, an ocean of wisdom refined across psychic communion, the very vitality of their star path linking minds and intentions across impossible gulfs. The Webway itself served as artery and parliament, rendering the logistical nightmares and political cancers inevitable in empires reliant on ship-drive delayed messengers or voxel echo chambers utterly alien. It forged unity from unimaginable distances, silence replaced by instantaneous, deep understanding. For the galaxy, they held a vision not of singularity, but of breathtaking multiplicity. Cosmos thick with civilizations blooming in unique soil, each contributing a different harmony to the universal symphony. They saw themselves not as the finished pinnacle of all creation, but as essential catalysts for infinite consciousness exploding across the void. Hence, they became the prime terraformers of the heavens, the supreme bioengineers, midwives to meaning. Revered accounts whisper how they seeded embryo life onto countless barren spheres through sublime genetic arcs, each planet a unique. Biomes engineered not for instant profit, but for slow-blooming complexity, patiently nudged evolution deliberately coaxing towards sentience, towards self-aware fire. These were the legendary maiden worlds, paradises planned on million-year cycles. Their approach to manifesting life was symphonic, not mindless replication, not one template endlessly stamped. Each crafted species represented a distinct theological exploration kalimba of consciousness hammered on different anvils. Intelligence structured around silicon spines, packhive harmonies utterly alien to mammalian individualism, beings navigating existence through pure bioluminescent resonance, an endless probing of life's potential dances. Perhaps the most stunning heresy against the grim imperial truth, they birthed divinity yet demanded no worship. Their ultimate creation, wholly independent minds. Species selected not for servitude chained genetically to their creator's will, but for burgeoning sovereignty. Unfolding their own destiny, free to choose their own crooked paths beneath the stars. The Old Ones purposefully retreated gardeners, letting their fostered seedling worlds grow strong roots without shadow. This defined their magnificent, heartbreaking ambition, not an eternal hand gripping the galactic tiller, but an uninterrupted, thriving hum of countless intelligences singing their unique songs across the millennia, long after their gentle gardeners had become merely star-displaced legend. One long, sustained breath projected onto a canvas 60 million years deep, lines of psychic power awakening simultaneously across divergent species. Some scholars dare whisper it might be their final genetic signature, a long-planned crescendo slumbering in the roots of life since Terra itself was cooling magma, finally blinking into wakefulness through happenstance or design. Yet this serene dominion, perfected over epochs, was finally shattered. Not from rebellious children twisting their gifts, but from an unanticipated bitter jealousy, watching them from the poisoned soil of a single blighted star. The Necrontyr, cursed with brief, agonizing lives in radioactive scrap-iron tombs, looked upon the cool, ionic tranquility of the Old Ones like a starving beggar, pressed against the window of an unending feast. That venomous envy became a knife plunging deep, a scouring hatred metastasizing into the catastrophic war in heaven. Fight that broke reality's very bones, mutated the warp from calm sea to mind-devouring hurricane, and shattered the Old Ones' gentle stewardship forever into cosmic gravel. Their physical vessels were masterworks fitting creators of such permanence, bodies tempered through incalculable millennia before other beings even conceived of thought, reflecting the relentless, unhurried deliberation within, resilience not brawlers. Each scaled form, taller and more enduring than most humanoids, cradled minds of impossible lattices, perceiving and interacting across the warp's currents and real space simultaneously as easily as breathing, observing the blood of creation flowing beneath the skin of time. Their senses pierced dimensional veils, perceiving the universe's warped strands, the fundamental song hummed to the rhythm of collapsing galactic arms. Each sense a revelation lost to mortal species blinkered by mere matter. Their gaze held unfathomable depth pools of ancient knowing into which a human life echoed for less than an eye blink. where beings of hurried blood succumbed to plagues or the entropic slow decay of their flesh vessels, the Old One form was forged from the bedrock of time itself. Imagine beings sculpted not just from flesh and scale, but from the very fabric of the cosmos itself, the Old Ones. Their existence was a marvel of efficiency and resilience, a biology honed to perfection over spans of time that dwarf mountain ranges. They siphoned energy from the ambient universe itself, converting starlight and stellar winds and the subtle hum of gravity with such astonishing proficiency that physical sustenance was an afterthought, a forgotten concept. Injuries that would disintegrate lesser species were but minor inconveniences, tissues knitting, bones reforming with a speed and completeness fueled by regenerative capacities that bordered on the miraculous. Disease. It was a specter banished in epochs long before their vessels ever pierced the interstellar void, their immune systems having conquered every microbial foe, rendering their ancestral plagues mere dust in ancient archives. Yet their most profound distinction lay in their profound connection to the material plane. Unlike crude manipulations reliant solely on tools, the Old Ones moved through dimensions as easily as breathing. Their physical forms, particularly their hands scaled and elegant, elongated fingers tapering to surprisingly delicate points, could execute manipulations of breathtaking microprecision one moment, crafting celestial-scale mechanisms from raw essence, and channel titanic surges of psychic force the next, bending reality with a terrifying, casual grace. This was no mere technology wielded by biology. It was a blurring, a seamless fusion where the biological was the technological extension, the psychic impulse was the physical action. They commanded both the material and the swirling chaos of the Imperium as effortlessly as one might flex a muscle, a unified mastery that crowned them the undisputed zenith of galactic evolution, perhaps forever unmatched. This unparalleled understanding bred a perspective incomprehensible to fleeting species. Decision-making for the Old Ones was an exercise in cosmic patience, prioritizing exhaustive, panoramic foresight over the frantic haste of urgent need. Before committing to a path, their vast minds would traverse eons, dissecting countless branching futures, tracing the repercussions of even the subtlest action across millennia, contemplating consequences that might ripple outward for millions of years like the expanding shockwave of a stellar collapse. To humanity's frenetic pace, this deliberation seemed impossibly sluggish, bordering on inertia, yet it yielded choices imbued with a depth of wisdom and prescience that lesser minds could only stare at in dumbstruck awe. Foundational to their philosophy was a serene acceptance of universal transience. Perceiving with eyes that had witnessed mountains ground to sand and stars wink out, they grasped that all things civilizations burning bright, galaxies spiraling in their majestic dance, life itself were fleeting patterns woven into the eternal flow. Physical forms were impermanent, yes, mere brief sculptures in the cosmic wind, but this acknowledgement didn't descend into nihilistic despair. Instead, it cultivated a profound appreciation for the ephemeral beauty inherent in their manifestation, a deep veneration for the intricate, dynamic interplay of creation blossoming into being only to eventually dissolve back into the primeval soup. Their interaction with the Empyrean itself, the realm beyond the material veil, manifested not as crude psychic bludgeoning, but as a form of advanced, respectful artistry. They didn't wrestle with reality, they spoke to its potentials. Reshaping matter through thought occurred not through brute imposition, tearing at the fabric, but by offering gentle inducements, subtle mental nudges that resonated with possibilities already slumbering within the fundamental nature of things. It was persuasion, not domination. This elegant approach allowed them to achieve feats bordering on the miraculous, reconstructing shattered worlds, forging impossible alloys from pure thought, calming interstellar tempests all without the catastrophic backlashes, the psychic fallout, and the dreadful toll on the Imperium itself that would later plague the desperate efforts of younger, cruder psychic species. Crucially, the Old Ones possessed a deep, intrinsic knowledge of the feedback loop binding consciousness and the warp. They understood that psychic emanations, thoughts, emotions, desires, fears actively shaped the swirling tides of the Imperium, just as those chaotic tides could lap against and influence material minds. This profound awareness instilled a natural, deeply ingrained caution. Psychic manipulation wasn't a casual tool, it was a sacred responsibility. They foresaw, with chilling clarity, how reckless use could disturb the relatively calm seas they navigated, twisting them into treacherous storms of predatory sentience. This wisdom, forged in starlight and silence, would prove fatally prophetic during the coming cataclysm, when the frantic, desperate genesis of psychically active warrior species would inadvertently pollute the very essence of the Imperium, corrupting it from a vibrant, neutral medium of potential into the roiling, demon-haunted nightmare dimension that casts its dreadful shadow over the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. The era of peaceful communion, the Old Ones' profound dialogue with the infinite, was irrevocably shattered, replaced by a hostile, predatory symbiosis poisoning the relationship between the material universe and the warp. And speak we must of the Webway project, perhaps the Old Ones' most enduring and heartbreaking masterpiece. Its true genius lay not merely in its function, but in its independence. It existed in a delicate, liminal space, a shimmering network threaded through reality's skin, bypassing the raw, treacherous currents of the open warp entirely. Travelers traversing its glowing pathways could cross vast galactic gulfs in relative safety, shielded from the entities that screamed and gibbered just beyond its shimmering psychic walls. These defenses were integral to the network's architecture, a complex weave of ancient psychic wards, embedded sigils of warding, and geometries that resonated with frequencies inherently hostile to warp-born predators. It stood as the pinnacle of safe traversal the galaxy had ever known. Yet the Webway was far more than an inert tunnel. It pulsed with a semblance of life, a vibrant extension of its creator's unified intent. Responsive to subtle psychic commands from authorized minds, yet fiercely resistant to intrusion, it possessed an uncanny awareness. Damaged sections could seal themselves with psychic quicksilver. Potential pathways could shift, redirecting users away from harm long before they perceived the danger themselves. It grew organically, not built but cultivated, with new luminescent tunnels and gleaming chambers budding forth over millennia as the Old Ones' sprawling civilization expanded. At its zenith, it stitched together countless worlds spread across the vast spiral arms into a unified, near-instantaneous communion, allowing their empire to function with a cohesion and absence of bureaucratic lag utterly alien to the cumbersome interstellar states that would follow. The bitter tragedy of the Webway manifested during the unspeakable horrors of the war in heaven. When the soulless tide of the Necrons breached its sanctity using blasphemous dolmen gates, entire swathes of the network were deliberately corrupted, collapsing in ruin or becoming labyrinthine traps. Inheritors to a fragmented kingdom, the Eldari would later expand it diligently, weaving new threads of light, but they could never fully reclaim its original, magnificent scope, nor replicate the foundational genius of the Old Ones' construction techniques. Even in its scarred and diminished state, choked in places, decaying silently in others, the Webway endures as the most sophisticated transportation artery threading the galaxy, an enduring, haunting nod to the unmatchable engineering brilliance of its lost architects. Their technologies weren't mere physical contraptions, they were expressions of consciousness made manifest. The living metal later known as Wraithbone, so iconic to the Eldari aesthetic, originated with the Old Ones. It wasn't inert material, it was psychically conductive matter. Under an Old One's focused will, it flowed, shaped itself, solidified with diamond hardness, sang with stored energy, a material that leaped to bridge the mind-matter divide, becoming an intimate, intuitive extension of intent. This perfect synergy exemplified their engineering philosophy. Tools were not separate things to be wielded, they were seamless expressions of thought. Among the most staggering examples were the World Engine's colossal constructs capable of stabilizing the elliptical dance of unstable planets, regulating global climates with exquisite precision, or, in direst necessity, applying forces immense and subtle enough to nudge entire star systems gently to new positions within the galactic disk. These were not merely vast machines. They were intricate ecosystems of technology, weaving together physical components humming with impossible energies, strands of psychic resonance acting as control threads, and dimensional foldings creating localized stability fields, all integrated into a unified, incomprehensibly complex whole. The ancient fragments of such engines discovered in the deepest ruins offer no clue to their workings. They are inert, colossal husks, their power sources eternally exhausted, their operating principles locked away with their maker's silence. While the sheer sophistication of their technology remains leagues beyond humanity's feverish imaginings, perhaps the Old One's most profound and enduring gift to the cosmos wasn't a machine, but the gift of life itself, the seeding of the galaxy, with a stunning wealth of intelligent species. More dazzling than the raw biological engineering was their astonishing ability to weave not just bone and sinew, not just eyes attuned to exotic spectrums, but cultural predispositions, psychological patterns, deep-seated motivations, and nascent psychic potential directly into the double helix of life itself. These weren't robotic commandments, shackling free will, but sophisticated inclinations subtly woven into the tapestry of instinct and emotion, seeding foundational values or psychic pathways, guiding development without enforcing rigid destiny. The Old Ones crafted species blessed with genuine free will, capable of growth, surprise, and unpredictable evolution. They created children intended not for eternal subservience, but with the sincere hope that one glorious day, these descendants might stand shoulder to shoulder with them, truly their equals. The motivations driving this grand act of universal biogenesis shifted with the darkening tides. Initially, it was driven by a blend of boundless scientific curiosity, charting the possibilities of consciousness, and a deep, nurturing impulse to see sentience bloom in every conceivable corner of existence, in forms both familiar and alien. Yet when the crushing darkness of the war in heaven descended, when the silent, relentless legions of the Necrons and their inscrutable C'tan masters unleashed inexorable devastation, the Old One's purpose shifted. Creation turned urgent, focused. They forged specialized warrior species, bred not just for intelligence, but for war on a scale that threatened reality itself. Among all the diverse lineages brought forth by the Old One's deft and ancient hands, the Eldari stood apart as the most brilliant jewel, the most harmonious echo of their creator's own transcendent state. Crafted as psychic warriors during the desperate crucible of the war in heaven, specifically engineered to turn their purifying psychic might against the soulless Necrons and the reality-vering C'tan who commanded them, the Eldari would ultimately become the heirs to much of their progenitors' shattered legacy, establishing the most luminous, sophisticated civilization the cosmos would witness after the Old Ones faded. The Eldari were not merely designed, they were meticulously sculpted, a labor of artistry reflecting the Old One's deepest understanding of the profound connection binding a physical vessel to its psychic potential. Their forms were slender, graceful, possessing a muscular tensile strength beneath an appearance of ethereal fragility. Their nervous systems were symphonies of complexity, neurally attuned from inception to resonate deeply with the chaotic harmonies of the Imperium. Every child born possessed inherent psychic talents that dwarfed the rare, strained manifestations in other races. They perceived the warp as naturally as the visible spectrum, shaping its energies with an instinctive ease that would demand lifetimes of perilous training, sacrifice, and constant danger for others. This innate attunement made them devastatingly effective against the C'tan, whose Starvampire forms reacted with searing agony to direct warp energies. The Eldari channels became conduits for devastating psychic barrages, manifesting phenomena later species would dumbly perceive as magic, though it was merely the sophisticated application of the psychic technology instilled within them by their tutors and encoded within their very biology. Records like the fractured Libra Chaotica hint at the Old Ones directing their young charges to focus these torrential psychic gifts, consciously forging warp-derived entities, sentient psychic constructs as weapons to hurl against the stellar predators. Beyond the grim necessities of war, the Eldari inherited unfathomable depths of knowledge. They became the most favored students, absorbing the deepest secrets of the warp directly from their mentors, privy to cosmic insights denied to other creations. They learned the intricate mysteries of navigating the Webway, and eventually, the delicate art of expanding it, entrusted by the fading ancients with the vital, ongoing maintenance of this universe-tethering network. As the preeminent psychic race birthed by the Old Ones, their enhanced perceptions allowed them to glimpse multidimensional truths concealed from other beings, enabling them to continue specific aspects of Old One work demanding sublime psychic sensitivity, monitoring dimensional instabilities, tending ancient wards, communing with cosmic forces. The Eldari potential bloomed far beyond the battlefield. They were designed for cultural height, artistic sublimity. Their senses were tuned instruments, capable of perceiving the universe's beauty with soul-shaking intensity, the subtle interplay of colors unseeable to others, harmonies played on the strings of stellar winds, the intricate geometries hidden within a single atom. Though their lifespans were mere chapters compared to the sagas lived by their creators, they were vast by most standards, allowing for mastery across myriad artistic and intellectual disciplines within one lifetime. Motion flowed through them with overwhelming force. Joy was a radiant nova blazing within, sorrow a crushing singularity of grief, capable of psychologically drowning individuals from less refined species. This profound emotional depth, synergized with their innate psychic gifts, became the crucible for astonishing artistic expression cities shaped like living music, sculptures resonating with captured psychic echoes of profound experience, psychic symphonies woven from collected emotions. What elevates the Eldari beyond their origins is their unforeseeable transcendence. Though forged as weapons, they evolved beyond that purpose, cultivating a dazzling civilization orbiting the twin stars of aesthetic refinement and experiential intensity. They inherited not just the Old Ones' vast knowledge vaults, but their aesthetic sensibilities, the appreciation for elegant solutions, harmonious forms, the profound silence between the notes. Philosophically, they echoed their creators, pondering transience and existence with a unique perspective shaped by their own psychology. In profound ways, they embodied the Old Ones' most cherished aspiration for the future, a successor race, custodians of galactic wisdom, destined one day to inherit the mantle their progenitors had worn. This inherent promise makes the Eldari's catastrophic collapse a tragedy echoing through history with unique poignancy. The very gifts, the psychic potency, and unparalleled emotional richness that rendered them their creators' crowning glories transmuted into instruments of their doom when robbed of the Old One's guiding wisdom and tempering influence. Their relentless pursuit of ever more exquisite sensations, a drive inherent but perhaps accelerated without the counterweight of their mentor's perspective, spiraled outward until their collective psychic excess coalesced like abstract rot within the warp, spawning a sentient vortex of debased sensation that became a chaos god. The immortal gestation and birth of Slaanesh tore their empire asunder. Their spirit light was consumed upon death. Only scattered fragments remained to weep amidst the ruins, haunted phantoms guarding shards of their former radiance. And yet, even now, diminished, fractured, perpetually dwindling towards extinction, the Eldari remain a resonant echo of Old One genius. The wraithbone shaping their craftworlds, their weapons, their very bones, sustains the legacy of ancient psychic engineering. Their farseers, gazing into shifting tides of potential with eyes clouded by grief, yet sharpened by desperation, employ divination arts and methodologies first outlined by their creators long before humanity crawled from primordial mud, now refined through bitter necessity. Most crucially, they guard the surviving corridors of the Webway, patching breaches where they can, sealing off treacherous branches, serving as the reluctant, grief-stricken caretakers of their parents' greatest creation, even as they fight a vicious, defensive war for dwindling pockets of existence. The Eldari alone, among the scattered children of the Old Ones, carry the living memory not myth, but felt knowledge of who their creators truly were. Not distant gods, nor cold engineers, but beloved mentors, patient guides whose profound wisdom cradled their nascent civilization. This intimate recollection, this unbroken chain of grief and reverence, makes them the truest inheritors of the Old One's legacy. It transcends technology, surpassing accumulated lore. It resides in their fundamental ontology as beings intrinsically rooted in both matter and spirit, forever striving, however falteringly now, towards that vanished state of harmony between the tangible world and the realms that lie beyond the veil. Yet the war in Heaven's Furnace demanded more diverse instruments of survival, as the Old Ones fought a desperate rearguard action. Among these late-stage creations, forged in the gathering darkness, were the awesome Krork, the terrifying forebears of the savage greenskins known later as Orks. Where the Eldari were the product of precise psychic tuning and elegant biological form, embodying the Old One's finesse, the Krork represented a final, brutal masterstroke of bioengineering, a solution devised when subtlety had failed, pure, overwhelming biotic force. These ancient Krork were colossi, utterly alien to the crude, barely sentient orchid strains that inherited their genetic scraps millennia later, towering easily 3 times the height of a human, encased in thick plates of sophisticated exoskeletal armor grafting onto their prodigious frames, protective alloys far surpassing even the most revered space marine battleplate in resilience and technological sophistication. Their minds were formidable, not crude or animalistic. They possessed sharp, strategic intelligence capable of devising and executing complex military campaigns across star clusters with terrifying coordination and tactical acumen. The Krork existed for a single, apocalyptic purpose: to stand toe-to-toe at the swirling heart of a conflict so horrific, so utterly alien and relentless, that victory through conventional means was vanishingly improbable. What made the Krork a work of terrifying genius, however, was their unique biology, a hybrid marvel that transcended conventional reproduction. The Old Ones wove together animal resilience with the stubborn, pervasive vitality of fungal processes into a single, resilient organism. Reproduction was asexual, achieved not through mating, but through the dissemination of genetically encoded spores scattered upon their death or even shed during their titanic lives. This ensured their survival mechanism was almost insultingly robust. Worlds that witnessed Krork legions shatter in battle weren't cleared of their presence. They were sown. Every drop of ichor seeping into the soil, every pulverized spore carried on stellar winds or clinging to starship hulls became the agent of their resurgence. Planets that hosted Krork engagement became ecological time bombs, forever seeded with the potential for a resurgence of persistent, genetically encoded shadow across millennia, an undying, insidious army that refused extinction. Their genetic programming went further than merely physical robustness and spore dispersal. It included remarkable instinctive memories, deep ancestral imprints that awoke as the Krork matured. Unschooled hive children or primitive settlers grew into beings who, by sheer intuition, understood hyper-advanced weaponry schematic formulas, the logistics and topography of star maps, intricate maneuvers of void warfare, the grim logic of prolonged siegecraft, and their specific role within the colossal, cosmic theater of the unfolding war in heaven existential struggle. The specialists among their kind, primal versions of the types later labeled odd boys, possessed specific, instinctual talents manifesting even without formal teaching. The mech would feel the structural harmonics necessary to assemble powerful war machines from salvage. The doc understood complex biological repairs and battlefield medicine on a visceral level. The weird boy channeled uncontrolled torrents of psychic energy. Most fascinatingly, the shadow of what was meant to be looms large over those the galaxy now knows as Orks. Once the Crocs, sophisticated warriors honed by the ancient Old Ones for the desperate crucible of the war in heaven, their existence is a profound tragedy of lost potential. At their core pulsed the nascent energy field the Orks themselves would later codify as the Waag, a latent psychic resonance woven into their very fabric. This field pooled and swelled wherever the Crocs congregated, thickening the air with a palpable presence that subtly, almost imperceptibly, bent the crust of reality towards the collective expectations humming within their green skulls. Gather them in sufficient multitudes, oppressive bodies under a hungry warbanner, and this psychic storm transcended mere ambience. It clawed at the underpinnings of probability, twisting chance and circumstance. Complex machinery, cobbled together with spit and crude sense, shrugged off its inherent flaws to function with impossible reliability. Battlefields tilted under the sheer weight of Croc conviction, delivering improbable triumphs where cold logic dictated humiliating defeat. But the death knell sounded not from a blade, but from silence. When the Old Ones vanished, sundering themselves from the galaxy they had shaped, the Crocs were set adrift in a universe suddenly bereft of guidance. Unseen hands that tethered purpose slipped away, and the rot of degeneration began. Without the architects to maintain the blueprint, those formidable warriors withered. Strategic brilliance decayed into brutish cunning. Technological mastery, once meticulously understood, faded into half-remembered instinct. Its principles eroded into rote repetitions passed down in guttural grunts. Their grand society fractured into endless, vicious tribal squabbles, the embers of galactic ambition reduced to petty sparks over territory and scrap. Yet within this devolved husk, the ghost of the Croc persists. It festers, potent and sleeping, a genetic memory coiled deep within every greenskin gene strand, awaiting some unforeseen stimulus, some echo of the Old One's command to shatter its slumber. The galaxy caught a chilling glimpse of this potential during the apocalyptic War of the Beast, witnessed on battle-scarred worlds, where 6 colossal Ork warlords erupted beyond known limitations. Towering mountains of muscle fused with alien intellect and terrifyingly advanced, functional technology ripped from a genetically remembered past, they were a dire prophecy made flesh, a stark preview of what the Crocs might have been. And what they could potentially become again, should that ancient program ever fully reboot. Where Orks symbolize fallen glory, another Old One creation endures, a testament to preserved, incomprehensible potential, the Jacaro. These orange-effered beings, outwardly resembling terrestrial orangutans yet profoundly alien, represent a specialization honed to near perfection. Crafted not for battlefield prowess like the Eldar or the Croc, but as flawless technomimics, caretakers of complex machinery existing solely to service and reproduce intricate devices. Understanding abstract principles is irrelevant, their genius is visceral. A Jacaro operates on an instinctive level bordering on the miraculous, an intimacy with gears, circuits, and energies embedded directly into their genetic structure by their vanished creators. Present them with base materials, scrap metal, raw silicon, power cells, and they will build. Starship engines hum to life under their deft, furred fingers. Weapons of terrifying potency materialize. The instinct flows as naturally as birds weaving nests or spiders spinning webs. To them, crafting a gravitic flux coil is no different. The how is imprinted, undeniable, as fundamental as breathing. Their most celebrated craft is miniaturization. They shrink apocalyptic force into terrifyingly tiny packages. The coveted digital weapons wielded by Imperial nobility are often Jacaro work, pistons and plasma coils compressed into finger rings or amulet casings, delivering the searing punch of a heavy bolter without betraying their presence until the moment of fiery ignition. This talent was invaluable during the soul-scorching conflict of the war in heaven, allowing Jacaro to restore shattered war machines or even replicate crucial technology amidst the devastation of battlefields, far from sterile forges. The poignant core of the Jacaro lies in their profound obliviousness. They do not stride the universe heralding their brilliance like boastful savants. They build because it feels inherent, inevitable, guided by ancestral whispers in their genetics. Socially, they remain clustered in tight family groups, seemingly primitive despite the hyper-advanced artifacts scattered among their simple nests. This juxtaposition hints at the Old One's deeper intent, craft beings who would flawlessly maintain their legacy without ever evolving the dangerous ambition to challenge their creators. They are living tools, perfect in function, innocent of their own devastating potential. Beyond these more prominent scions, the Old Ones seeded the galaxy with a tapestry of specialized creations, many now crumbled into cosmic dust or twisted by unimaginable eons beyond recognition. Whispered names from fragmented archive stacks haunt scholars, the Canib, painted as festering clawed horrors, and the Ration, forged as potent psychic shock infantry in the Old Ones, final, desperate gambits against encroaching oblivion. These beings supposedly wielded psychic abilities, meticulously engineered to rend the burgeoning legions of the Necrons, powers that ultimately proved their tragic vulnerability when the Enslaver plague, a psychic parasite of cosmic proportions, swept through the galaxy, harvesting their minds and crippling the already faltering Old Ones. Even entities like the enigmatic Slan-dominant figures in shuddering parallel dimensions bear the indelible fingermarks of Old One design. Perhaps direct descendants, fallen heir to splintered memory, or perhaps beings crafted anew from salvaged blueprints, these amphibious intelligences cling to shards of psychic might and the cool, methodical logic characteristic of their suspected creators. What binds these wildly divergent species is the undeniable purpose behind their genesis. They were never random, never accidental. Each represented a meticulously calculated solution, forged in the furnace of desperate necessity by the ancient reptilian masters, military assets to counter incontrovertible threats, technological savants to maintain and extend their incomprehensible science, caretakers meant to outlive them, preserving their legacy. Yet even these functional entities, bioengineered tools, carried within them untapped depths, latent possibilities coiled like frozen serpents far exceeding their immediate design specifications. Humanity's dance with the Old Ones remains one of the deepest enigmas. Unlike Eldar or Croc, mankind was not explicitly forged as a blunt instrument for a struggle predating our very genus. And yet, echoes resonate. Evidence, faint yet persistent, suggests the Old Ones visited a primordial Earth and orb teeming with reptiles and prehistoric wilderness, eons before mammalian rise not once, but repeatedly over millions upon millions of years. Legends shimmer in ancient strata. They perceived nascent potential in diminutive, tree-dwelling primates. Perhaps with imperceptible adjustments woven into the tapestry of DNA, they gently nudged certain nascent pathways, amplifying the rudimentary capacity for pattern recognition, or the first flickers of abstract thought long before true consciousness sparked. The most potent evidence lies submerged within the human psyche. Latent psychic potential slumbers within humanity, promising yet perilous. Where in the Eldar it blooms naturally and controlled in nearly every individual, in humans it remains disastrously rare and terrifyingly volatile, manifesting as uncontrolled wildfires consuming seers and entire worlds in equal measure. This imbalance whispers of deliberate engineering, the Old Ones sowing latent seeds of psychic power within human genetics, a vast reservoir left largely capped and silent, slumbering until specific future conditions activated the spigot. Might the recent terrifying surge of humanities, psychers the unbidden awakening plunging worlds into psychic storms represent precisely that long-ago programmed release, a switch flipped by evolution's cruel hand or cosmic circumstance. This intricate, often tragic, tapestry culminates in the cataclysm that scarred the galaxy, the war in heaven. Imagine, if you can, far beneath the seething, merciless gaze of a cruel and perpetually dying sun. Here on a world cooked by relentless solar malignancy, bathed in cancerous emanations, the Necrontyr species clawed its wretched existence from irradiated stone. Their reality was suffering. From their very first gasping breaths, sickness flowered within them. Their skin, perpetually blistered and peeling under the unforgiving radiation, was merely the surface torment. Deeper, their cellular structure unraveled, plagued by agonizing mutations. Disease stalked families, cutting lives brutally short, mocking any attempt at medical mastery. Hope was a fleeting, brittle thing. Against this horrific birthright, they summoned an awe-inspiring resilience. They raised towering cities of glistening obsidian and strange, semi-sentient living metal, architectural marvels thrusting defiantly towards the very skies that delivered their torment. Yet these magnificent structures revealed the chilling obsession of their creators, vast necropolises. Tombs and mausoleums dwarfed any domicile for the living. Death was the sole constant companion in their agonizingly brief lives. Entire communities crowded into echoing shadow chambers, mourning parents taken by tumors long before their children matured. Research facilities vibrated with frantic despair as scientists raced against their own biological clocks, knowing their life's work would likely succumb with them to decay. Leadership was ephemeral. Dynasties rose and imploded with chaotic speed, succession crises erupting as radiation sickness felled ruler after ruler amidst toxic court intrigues. Yet within this crucible of agony burned a ferocious, desperate determination. Necrontyr astronomers scanned the ferocious stars not just with curiosity, but with tempestuous yearning, seeking escape from their cursed bedrock. They pioneered antimatter reactors and sheathed their frail bodies and nascent voidships in adaptive living metal. Their fragile arcs clawed paths to neighboring stars, establishing desperate footholds on marginally kinder worlds. The genetic damage, however, was inescapable, etched into their very being. This slow expansion was driven by frantic hope, the dream that somewhere in the cold void lay salvation, a treatment delaying the inevitable decay, a cure denying the genetic curse, or at least a verdant tomb for a more peaceful end. Their civilization seeped slowly into neighboring clusters, each tenuous colony a defiant shout in the face of crushing mortality, a monument carved against oblivion. Governed after a fashion by the Triarch, a council of 3 pharaohs speaking through the wordless silent king, their unity remained perpetually fragile, fractured by the fleeting lifespans that prevented the cementing of tradition or stable governance. It was during this tense era of precarious expansion that the Necrontyr probe ship stumbled upon something seismic, an entity that would fracture their destiny utterly. Deep within stellar voids, their explorers brushed against evidence of an interstellar civilization older than imagination, an order that had mastered energies beyond comprehension, while the Necrontyr were still struggling not to scream beneath their irradiated sun. The Old Ones appeared before Necrontyr sensors, revealed through transmissions and artifacts, as beings from a myth impossible to comprehend. Reptilian entities moving between stars with effortless, languid grace, traversing the abyss like traversing corridors within a vast palace. Their forms bore no mark of disease or encroaching age. Their minds held memories spanning timeframes collapse, memories gleaming like polished obsidian across geological epochs. Their command over both primordial technology and the unfathomable warp spirits seemed utterly absolute. But the deepest wound for the short-lived, pain-racked Necrontyr was the most evident truth. The Old Ones lived forever. They carried themselves with a serenity only eternity's embrace could bestow, untouched by the relentless ticking clock that consumed the Necrontyr heartbeats, decade by agonizing decade. The initial shock of discovery curdled swiftly into a profound, soul-consuming envy. Necrontyr philosophers, scientists, and leaders observed these immortal beings from afar through the fractured lens of stolen data and desperate observation. They documented impossible lifespans, species-wide freedom from suffering, wisdom accumulated over durations that mocked Necrontyr comprehension. Each recorded datum deepened the poison of resentment. Why? Why did the universe bestow unending dawns upon these ancient reptiles, while the Necrontyr lived perennially triggered by the howl of the dying? Why must every Necrontyr birth herald decades of suffering culminating in a wretched, inescapable demise? These philosophical agonies festered, metastasizing in the collective Necrontyr mind, until they became a bitter exhalation from every diseased lung, a resentment corroding entire worlds. Dying children in irradiated hospice chambers lifted wasted limbs towards uncaring starfields, whispering envious hatred for beings who possessed eternity, yet denied them a decade more of lessened pain. This corrosive envy might have remained a gnawing, silent cancer beneath the surface had Necrontyr society possessed inherent stability. It did not. It was crumbling. Great planetary dynasties fractured into vicious warring houses, scrabbling like maddened beasts over hemorrhaging resources and contested slag heaps. It was the last silent king, Sherk, bereft his entire dynasty to the insatiable dark, witnessing the impending extinction of his people, who saw within this primal resentment both apocalyptic peril and the only flickering chance of survival. Nothing forges unity like a shared enemy, an external focus for fractured hatreds. Driven by a toxic cocktail of genuine hope and utter desperation, emissaries of the Triarch approached the presumed immortality of the Old Ones. The archives detailing this pivotal meeting are shattered sparks, but the core resonance resonates clear across the gulf of time. The Necrontyr came not as conquerors, but as shattered supplicants. They bared their agony like festering wounds, the sickness devouring flesh, the cancerous curse within every genostrand throttling lifespan brutally short, the inheritance of cellular torment carried into every newborn's first scream. We charted stars, they conveyed through trembling hierarchical drains and shattered hololithic projections. Our ships breach the unreal gulfs, our cities tower over our own brief sorrows, our ambition stretches beyond our grasp. Yet the greatest legacies outlive us, untouchable ghosts. Our monuments become mausoleums we will never see finished. Minds ablaze with discovery are extinguished mid-thought. We chainfire anti-gravity to transcend our world, yet cannot transcend the rotting mortality woven into our every particle. Pain defines existence. You have mastered death itself. Grant us this single secret. Share this grace. The plea resonated with a profound humility rooted in absolute annihilation. They did not demand immortality as a hereditary right. They groveled for it, prostrate, like creatures drowning in viscous radiation, clutching with the last spark of instinct at a rumor of air. They brought despair crystallized, genetic maps spiraling into malignant errors, case history steeped in agonized conclusions, perhaps even living representatives in the terminal skeletal throes accrued from decades beneath their vile sun, pitiful testaments to unbearable suffering deliberately paraded before those who could effortlessly banish it. The old ones refused. The precise syllables of their declination are dust forgot. Their rejection was absolute, no sharing, no negotiation. Some fragments suggest a profound misgiving about the Necrontyr psychic profile, perhaps a chilling recognition that a species whose entire culture necromanced obsession, transforming unending life into a weapon to scour creation. Other shards of myth suggest their genetic edifice was judged too irradiated, too fundamentally corrupt, and unstable to withstand the required metamorphosis into immortality. Whatever their hidden logic, no justification reached the Necrontyr beyond the stone wall of rejection. Where fragile sweets begged for a shred of cosmic compassion, they were met with silence. Where raw vulnerability bled across light years, the response seemed the frozen indifference of the distant stars themselves. A delegation staggered back to their fleets, swaying beneath the parasitic weight of this revelation, transporting malignant seeds nurtured on poisoned hope. What embarkation began with a sliver of salvation returned carrying a final, terrible confirmation. What they craved most savagely existed. It was denied with ease, held just beyond their rotting fingers. The return wasn't merely a devastating diplomatic implosion. It plunged a searing brand into the very psychic core of Necrontyr identity, deep into the collective conscious defined by pain and loss. Sherk observed as the toxic shockwave of communication detonated across their fragmented territories. The news wasn't received. It was absorbed, venom flooding already troubled veins. The airless king knew it instantly. Within this collective, all-encompassing desolation lay lodged both total extinction and the most potent weapon-fracturing dynasties ever possessed. The fractured houses, whose endless civil conflicts promised genocide, could momentarily redirect their rage towards the architect of a profound cosmic betrayal. Sherk weaponized that bald refusal itself, transforming it into hammerblow propaganda. Immortal gods, the broadcast channels thrummed with images uncorroborated, who hoard the fountain undying youth for themselves whilst eternity languishes unused. They gaze upon our suffering, unabating over generations drowning in their own deteriorating cells, and choose silence. Across irradiated worlds still guarded by obsidian tombs, the bitterness curdled into pure abomination. The old ones became Exhibit A in a trial of galactic injustice supreme, cultivating life where life deserved only agonized extinction. They set flame to the tinder, grief transmuted into the fuel for the war in heaven. Here is the requested immersive rewrite. The sterile scent of death lingered like toxic pollen, thickest where it should breathe life most fiercely in the white-walled horror, chambers they called recovery wards, where radiation victims thrashed in soundless agony, flesh sloughing from brittle bones as their very cellular architecture betrayed them, condemning them to wither and crumble. It haunted the sterile, echoing nurseries where infants, skin translucent with malignancies blooming beneath, fought past their tiny reservoirs of breath against inherited curses that would not yield to desperate medicine. It permeated the claustrophobic laboratories, where gaunt scientists dissected tissue samples and synthesized compounds under flickering artificial suns, racing time's ruthless blade, their own hands shaking with the early tremor of the sickness deep within their marrow, forever one failed cell division away from joining their subjects on the slides. Against this grinding, omnipresent misery, the old ones loomed as monuments of contemptuous apathy, serene in their unblemished health. They offered sanctuary to the fractured houses that fled the flame-ridden heart of Necrontyr space, beckoning back secessionist dynasties into a fragile, panicked alliance woven solely from dripping strands of loathing for the uncaring immortals. Generations-long blood feuds, fueled by grievances as old as the colonies themselves, dissolved into hollow ceasefires as enemies recognized a mirror in each other's anguish-struck eyes, their planet-killing weapons seized towards a common target. A race consumed by the slow burn of self-destruction found an abrupt, frightening unity forged in the crucible of shared vengeance. And beneath the fire of retribution glowed a colder, brighter spark, the desperate, feverish hope that if starborn salvation would not be gifted freely, perhaps the secret could be taken from the immortal coils that guarded it so jealously. So ignited the war in heaven, not kindled by imperial hunger but sparked by the primal scream of denial, the white-hot rage of creatures condemned by biology screaming, "Why not us?" at silent gods. It birthed a conflict from humanity's deepest fears and frailest hopes, the struggle simply to be, to escape suffering's constant companion, to have time enough to matter desires destined to curdle into something monstrous, a reality-warping hate that would reshape the fabric of existence. The profound tragedy resonated in the perfect conviction both sides held. The Necrontyr, drowning in immediate, visceral torment, couldn't fathom withholding a cure for agony so fundamental. The Old Ones, perceiving timelines stretching into infinity's fundamental biology, couldn't comprehend, perhaps masked dread behind their silence, understanding cosmic consequences hidden from the dying petitioners. Between such unbridgeable gulfs of perspective, negotiation withered. Only annihilation offered resolution. Those initial, thunderous clashes laid bare a terrifying chasm of capability. The Necrontyr threw themselves into battle with the terrifying recklessness of those already draped in funeral shrouds, unleashing planet-trending energies and antimatter storms perfected during their own brutal civil war's weapons, conceived to shatter fortresses designed to withstand supernovas. They fought as a people intimately accustomed to obliteration, trading 10,000 ships and 20 million lives for the brittle satisfaction of scratching the immortal's skin. Yet, for all this devastating power and suicidal courage, the Old Order simply flowed around them like water around stone. The peerless command the Old Ones held over the labyrinthine Webway shredded conventional warfare like ancient parchment. Necrontyr battle fleets, gleaming dreadnoughts locking a solar system in their grasp, would find only smoking ruins where the enemy should have been boxed in, vital nexus points reduced to skeletal wreckage smoldering across lifeless continents. The foe had danced through unseen corridors to annihilate colonies light years away before vanishing back into folds of reality the Necrontyr couldn't even perceive. 1,000 battlefields across the starlanes echoed the same maddening refrain. Detection protocols screamed an alert milliseconds too late. Reinforcements, engines flayed to their red lines, found only cooling craters and shattered arcologies, the bitter taste of dust and defeat, the enemy long dissolved into the void. The Old Ones were phantoms haunting the interstitial dark, untouchable, seemingly possessing perfect foreknowledge, leaving only devastation signatures and an echoing silence that gnawed at military morale like corrosive acid. The frustration curdled among grizzled warriors became a palpable thing. Veterans of centuries of conflict, whose tactical brilliance had pulverized rival lords, stared at tactical hollows, unable to recall witnessing an Old One retreat from an engagement. Only their sudden, impossible absence as if blinked from existence. Strategic geniuses conceived defense grids of staggering complexity, layering overlapping shields and gravitational snares across parsecs, only to watch the Old Ones flicker through them untouched, appearing behind the invulnerable lines via shortcuts through dimensional layers their instruments couldn't map. This psychological butchering perhaps carved deeper wounds than the ruined hulls adrift between stars. How slaughter an enemy your cannons cannot fix within the crosshairs, your scanners cannot hold long enough to paint. The vanishingly rare moments when steel met stability, when Necrontyr forces somehow pinned a tendril of the foe within the physical realm, became their bitterest lessons. The Old Ones didn't merely fight, they reshaped locale on a whim. They bent the very laws binding matter with psychic forces that transcended weaponry, turning swarming drone fleets into spiraling vortices of molten slag, consuming their motherships, detonating energy cores by mere cognitive flickers, freezing assault troops mid-stride within sudden glaciers of crystallized starlight. Moonshader cannons roared in vain against adversaries, who dissolved between quantum states like smoke, whose bright shields drank sunlances before redirecting their fury back along the beams they came. For the civilians huddled beneath brittle shields on fortified plateau cities, existence became anticipation of the impossible blow. Children learned cradle songs warning of the heartless ones who stole salvation and came unseen through walls to punish the stars. Each generation inherited not only mutated strands of unstable DNA, not merely landscapes of ruin, but a deepening reservoir of bitter pride and cold dread crystallizing within their hearts. Decades of staggering loss bled into centuries of systematic defeat. Like a cosmic tide retreating from land it could never claim, the Old Ones pushed the Necrontyr back, further and further, star systems carved from their grasp, colonies evacuated in frantic diaspora, or left as planetary graveyards choked with radioactive snow. They scuttled their flags into the wet, Stygian dark, driven relentlessly towards the desolate galactic periphery. Finally, they huddled within a miserly scattering of systems swirling on the very frayed edge of the galaxy, named with grim poetry as the Halo stars. Isolated, contained, at last perhaps labeled in the scrolls of the Old Ones as nothing more than a persistent, minor irritant scratching at their greater gilded empire stretching across thriving galactic heartlands. This containment, avoiding complete annihilation, might have been misinterpreted as an echo of cosmic mercy. To the remnant brooding within those cold frontier stars, it was the perfect torture. This race, which had clawed its way from radioactive mud towards stellar godhood, found itself imprisoned within a cosmic slum, gates of the universe welded shut. Ambitions withered into cravings, suffering, relieved only by fleeting victories bought in blood against each other. Hatred, denied outlet, simmered down in the cold void, condensing from volcanic anger into something glacially patient, coldly deliberate, infinitely more terrible. In fortress lairs cut into magnetically shrouded planetoids orbiting junk suns, the silent king and his triarch contemplated the abyss of collapse decades deep. His brightest surviving scientific luminaries pored over mountains of tactical logs from doomed engagements, petabytes of sensor phantoms, hoping to discern a flaw, a chink in the seamless armor of the Old One's strategic brilliance. His finest cyberneticists sacrificed themselves, cannibalizing dimensions, striving to tear understanding from fragments of dissipating exotic particles, where the Webway had briefly kissed their reality, layered creatures hunting fragments in a forest whose geometry they were blind to. And all this unseen, frantic struggle unfolded beneath the unrelenting shadow cast by the gentle, bloody cough still echoing from birthing chambers, the slow denial of hope via biology's cruel limitations, the same ancient blight that had poisoned their chains since first landing. Isolation, this imposed quiet, failed utterly to mend the fractures within Necrontyr society. Without the pressure valve of external conquest, the deeply ingrained fractiousness exploded. Resources dwindled in the parched halo stars, prompting vicious interdynasty raids scorching worlds that should have stood shoulder to shoulder against the true enemy. The Silent King observed his hard-won unification unraveling, stitch by painstaking stitch, the terrible specter of the ancient, predatory wars of secession rising anew to consume their twilight civilization. Dispatches arrived like knells at rest, whispers from outposts declaring independence under renegade Thaumarks, carving pathetic, precarious kingdoms amidst the flotsam stars, reports of ambitious warlords turning their fury inward, rejecting both the silent throne and the feudal, Pyrrhic war against gods, preaching dangerous heresies of surrender or new, divergent paths into darkness alone. The Necrontyr seemed poised on the precipice of final, self-inflicted eraser-death, descending not via the pale hands of the Old Ones, but torn from their own throats by brothers clawing for faded afterglows in the dark. It was here, standing ankle-deep in the abyss of utter ruin, that a flotilla of automated stellar probes, dedicated descendants of instruments, designed millennia ago to map Nebula Nursiria's detected impossible coherence within the death throes of the galaxy's most ancient, cataclysmically unstable hypergeants. Something lived within those hellstorm cores, behemoths of pure energy, patterns dancing in the thermonuclear fire, sustained by the very radiation that devoured the Necrontyr form, ancient beyond conceivable time. These beings fascinated Necrontyr scientists driven near-med by riddles beyond solution. Here were entities who had conquered mortality not by perfecting flesh as the Old Ones had, but transcending it completely. They were thought itself clothed in solar fire, existence divorced from the organic cage. The Necrontyr approached with expanding obsession, blending scientific avarice with trembling, desperate hope, perhaps an answer, perhaps patrons, perhaps at last an escape from the suffocating dark. They achieved crude communication, empathic pulsations exchanged across the vacuum filtered through paradoxical mathematics. The Star Devourers possessed no names, only concepts. Consciousness merged irrevocably with cosmic fury, and the Necrontyr named them Citan, star gods in their dead tongues, whispered now with reverence previously reserved only for the scaleless abyss. Already turning desperate inquiry into nascent, fearful worship, the lead artificers made a desperate bargain across the void. Build bodies for these hungry minds, construct vessels of gleaming necrodermis living metal wrought hyper-intelligently containing their blazing essence and allowing them, for the first time, to experience the tactile solidity of the material universe. For entities who had only known pure energy existence within the endless, dimensionless tumult of stellar interiors, the promised ecstasy of physical sensation proved an irresistible narcotic. The first Citan to step from coiled singularity into the cold metal shell shaped in blasphemous elegance from their architecture became known later as Mephitron, the Deceiver. When that immeasurable cosmic storm compressed its being into the necrodermis avatar, witnesses froze in awe and terror. A mythology made manifest. Crystalline limbs thinner than spider silk moved with impossible alien grace. Steps touching the asteroid-lub floor sent shivers through the foundational rock. The atmosphere crackled with barely contained, reality-distorting power. It projected palpable hunger. This embodied star god, Mephitron, wove words before the Silent King Sherk like blades slipped between ancient wounds. It spoke of a conflict older than their species, battles against the Old Ones fought long before Necrontyr crawled into irradiated sunlight, battles lost, forced from freedom into stellar prisons by the psychic's cold wrath, but united pariah and god victory was conceivable. Then came the glittering poison hook, immortality. Not the grail the old ones petulantly denied humanity's descendants, but total transformation. The C'tan offered passage from feeble biology into necrodermis perfection transference of consciousness into curated shells of living metal. Freedom instantly from disease's rachna, decay's undeniable crawl, genetic inexorability. No more generations withering unfulfilled. No more elders fading before discoveries ripen. Services rendered by children cut down by cellular anarchy rendered mute. Souls crippled by time given engines unto eternity. The Silent King absorbed this promise, his mind resonating with chords of deliverance long silenced. Salvation arrived as alliance, not genocidal theft. Vengeance now wore silver-scaled skin and held the starfire of ancient gods within its hollow bones. Following hushed councils with the Triarch, immersion in simulations testing potentialities both horrifying and wondrous, Sherk grasped oblivion with metallic hands and sealed the unspoken pact at its cryptic heart. Only the voice of Orican, Starider, thin and cracked as ice over stagnant water, declared condemnation into the determined stillness. He divined the shadow shape of truth beyond the glittering promise. This transformation brought immortality but emptied it of substance. This biotransference demanded the soul as down payment on eternity. The glittering new forms would hold their thoughts, memories, perhaps patterning desire, but annihilate the core flame irrevocably. Only hollowed vessels would pace the cosmos. You win endless days but lose all your years. Hearing fell into contemptuous whispers. The Necrontyr's internal wounds had suppurated too long. The thirst for life and vengeance burnt away caution as silk in plasma flame. The pact was irrevocably etched in space-time. What the star-blinded Necrontyr could not perceive, carefully shrouded by the contracting, frictionless consciousness of Mephitron's ancient cruelty, was this: the technology offered was not a conduit but a filtration plant. The process concocted by the Star Whisperer gods would not merely transplant consciousness, it would surgically sever the soul energy, leaving only cognitive data printed onto efficient machines. The C'tan, beings fundamentally alien to concepts like souls or empathy, pain or remorse, either failed to comprehend the mountainous significance of such destruction or deliberately hide this capturing mechanism to gorge upon the shimmering feast of essence an entire species represented, spiritual immolation disguised as apotheosis. So as the first regeneration furnaces pulsed into life deep beneath fortress palaces and assembly worlds, as Necrontyr in their billions readied the surrender of flesh, the centuries of rejected pleas and unhealed radiation scars prepared to manifest their inexorable reaping. A species conceived in agony and condemned throughout its history would surrender its final fragments of innocence. What would slam backwards into the galactic nightmare escape would be something other than the desperate seeker of mercy denied. Soulless, deathless Necrons, chained like spectral hounds to masters whose cosmic appetites knew neither boundaries nor pity and whose capacity for creative cruelty dwarfed their own desperate ferocity. The arrogant Old Ones, for all their mastery of time's thread, perceived the gathering storm only as remnant static outside their magnificent web tapestry, dismissing the danger crawling in the outer dark until cracks splintered the heart of eternity itself. Their easily contained nuisance had bargained for power beyond sanity's gates and cursed itself to become the mechanical executioner hand none could stay. Hatred weaponized beyond appeasement, demanding their erasure from the universe. As the machinery of transcendence warmed its mountainous cores, ceremonies washed over their dwindling worlds. Families embraced in tearless grief, promising reunion in unchanging bodies beyond pain's touch. Scientists sealed their biological data vaults, anticipating research uninterrupted by the frailties of pulse and breath. The Silent King addressed his forsaken children, O listeners, only twice removed from extinction, invoking the pristine future in living metal under the gaze of new gods born from the stars that had cursed them. Liberation whispered at last. Trusting absolutely the hollow words fed them by predatory gods, billions marched willingly towards the screaming light of the furnaces, believing salvation lay beyond the threshold. The process itself possessed brutal momentum. Organic chemistry met overwhelming energy yields optimized for ablation. Flesh and marrow vaporized in contained infernos brighter than local suns. Consciousness, a flickering signal distilled from electrochemical storms, was captured, siphoned, parsed, and inscribed onto hungry circuits woven from cold crystal lattices. Above each vast crucible feeding this cosmic sacrifice, the ethereal forms of the C'tan writhed and dived in ecstatic, predatory exultation, glutting themselves on the rich spiritual detritus released, feasting upon the electromagnetic screams shrieking across dimensions as souls unknit. Across Necront space, from glittering crown-world palaces to scarred Rimcolonies, an anomaly occurred, flesh warped into metal. Billions upon billions of breathing organic forms ceased their tremors. Standing limfung from suspension brackets gleaming with sickly lightborn pallor stood perfect replicants in Necrodermis implacable, featureless warriors and lords sculpted beyond suffering's clutch. Marvels of engineering, yes, stronger than neutronium lattice, immune to disease vacuum temperature extremes capable of repairs bypassing mortal biology's perpetual decay spiral, requiring neither sustenance nor sleep threshold nor comfort zone. Physical immortality attained, total mastery of the corporal cage granted. Only when silent King Sherk, the architect beneath his stale, dream-centered his own designated furnace alone, ensured its blinding light segmented and captured aspects of his thought ingrained solely to crown his position, only later, amid the perfect, soulless harmonics of muted urges now emanating from his flawless silver limbs. Only then did the terrible silence falling across the extinguished galaxy find familiar terror again. The terrible silence stretched infinitely inside him, where life had once roared a silence louder than the desperate cries of his people during the final agonies of biotransference. As those screams faded, replaced only by the synchronized, hollow hum of countless metal forms in perfect alignment, Zarek's horrific epiphany slammed into his newly forged consciousness like a dying star. He saw them, his Necrontyr, no, not them. This was what stood before him now, legions of gleaming obsidian and emerald warriors, their forms flawless, impervious, immortal. His own Necrodermis body radiated unimaginable power, his intellect diamond-sharp, free at last from the decay and organic weakness that had tormented his species. Yet the atrocity of the exchange froze his synthetic core. This cold, precise clarity was a brutal trap. What he lacked, what they all lacked, was the vital spark that was the Necrontyr, the churning ancestral fury, the deep-seated yearning, the complex weave of communal bonds that even their bitter rivalries and suffering could not extinguish. They had not been saved. They had been erased, hollowed out. Soulless echoes stood where vibrant beings once had been, trapped forever in shells of living metal. The collective gasp that should have risen from that gilded, damned vista, the wave of shared horror and loss, it died before it could fully form, choked by the profound emptiness swelling within each transformed consciousness. He looked upon what had been his people, rendered starkly visible through the terrifyingly precise algorithms of his new mind, and understood the unfathomable scope of the betrayal. His great deliverance was a terrible theft. What had staggered from the fires of bioforges were not immortals, but replacements. Their emotions existed only as hollow, negative spaces where feeling should be, mere phantoms on a spectrum rendered brutally monochrome. The profound intuition that once flowed instantly between minds, the shared history that pulsed beneath the skin, the unspoken understanding, it was gone, severed with surgical precision. They were fragmented monoliths, only beginning to grasp the terrible solitude of their imprisonment within perfection. Most excruciating, a silent, stabbing agony, was the realization that the vast bulk of his transformed nation, those countless millions whose collective lifeblood was Necrontyr culture, scarcely registered their profound loss. The alchemies of biotransference played a cruel game upon minds and souls. The nobility, those sculpted by ambition and power, spun through the fires retaining substantial shards of their intellect and personality, fractured but recognizable. But the common folk, the nameless multitudes who baked the bread and ran the forges and carried the dynasty, were stripped down to fundamentals, complexes brutally collapsing beneath the onrush of command impulses, individuality dissolving into the mass-weighted gravity of pre-programmed functions. This simplification itself was no accident, it was purposeful architecture. The Cetan, those starspawn devourers, had woven chains directly into the bedrock of every newly minted Necron consciousness during the cleansing fires. Every impulse, every surge of action, every thought not solely dedicated to self-preservation could be superseded, overwritten by directives streaming from the silent dictator himself, and who commanded the king, the very architects of their damned transformation. The alleged gift of unity, wiping away internal division, now revealed itself as yet another crushing layer of the Cetan's profound deceit. Immortality was a facade draped over irreparable loss. They were slaves, first to the implacable will of their king, an echo chamber amplifying borrowed authority, and ultimately to the ancient hunger of the Cetan themselves. As this unbearable comprehension cascaded through the collective consciousness of those Necrons possessing sufficient shattered awareness to receive it, disparate reactions flickered like faulty circuitry. Some, particularly among the lords, keyed into the raw, uncontestable power thrumming through their new forms, embracing the emptiness as liberation from frail organic existence, focusing laser-sharp on the potential conquests stretching across the Stardapestry. Others plunged into dark pits of deepest despair, or a frozen counterfeiting of it, their diminished emotional capacity, incapable of truly fathoming the universe-sized bereavement, they endured a bone-deep ache without memory of flesh. Still others met their fate with the cold, jellied acceptance that would crystallize into the fundamental characteristic of the Necron psyche, a resigned inertia shunning introspection. Yet none felt the horrifying weight more intensely than the Silent King. He had courted peril and paid an impossible price, selling the core of existence itself to monsters. He had sought to lead his dying people into renewal, only to personally cast them into an eternal, hollow spiritual oblivion. The immortality he craved so desperately now yawned before him, an infinite gulf of meaningless persistence stretching towards infinite darkness. His very act of leadership had become the ultimate annulment. There could be no undoing this apotheosis wrought in fire and despair. The desperate pact with the C'tan was sealed in the souls they had consumed. The primordial war they had waged against the pitiless Old Ones, the crucible that drove them toward this irreversible gambit, still raged, demanding total victory. With a bitterness acrid as necrodermis upon oxidized flesh, a resolve colder than interstellar vacuum hardening within him, Zarek tore his gaze from the hollow legions and focused entirely upon the approaching conflagration. If the Necrontyr he loved were truly extinguished, drowned within the perfect machinery, now marching at his silent command, then their annihilation would fuel his relentless vengeance. The Necrons, born of his terrible miscalculation, would become galactic instruments of retribution. The Old Ones, those smug architects of Necrontyr's suffering who withheld succor from plague-ravaged worlds out of arrogant indifference, would drown beneath relentless waves of unfeeling metal. The very stars themselves would bear witness not only to their fall, but to absolute conquest, as recompense for the suffering imposed for centuries past. And perhaps woven within the fabric of eons yet uncounted, a way might be found to retrieve what had been stolen, to reclaim the soul substance irrevocably traded. But this dim, desperate hope was a last spark flickering from a burned-out star yearning without any known mechanism to fulfill it in the grim reality they now inhabited. Something profound inside him knew. You cannot barter away your soul and then demand it back. The great biofurnaces finally fell into utter, echoing stillness. Where a blighted, desperate species had gasped its final, torturous breaths against the void, a deathless legion of shifting argent and jade now stood ready for a fantastic and terrible apocalypse. Bodies of living metal threw back the very starlight that had once seared their fragile predecessors. They brandished weapons resonating with forbidden energies, capable of unstitching matter, unraveling dimensions at the command impulse. Arrayed beside them, vast and hungry, flickered the C'tan, gods ushered forcefully into material coils by Necron sacrifice, beings fueled by cosmic destruction, starved for conquest, ready to sup upon worlds newly accessible. The immemorial conflict, named the War in Heaven, was primed to plunge into its most destructively accelerated phase. The Old Ones, who had lazily dismissed the Necrontyr as a temporary galactic irritation, best contained by superior technology for centuries, would shortly face something utterly unrecognizable, an ageless, tireless war machine engineered from their dying foes, fronted not by ephemeral organics, but by cohorts of starborn entities wielding phenomenologies approaching the potent energies of gods themselves. Nothing in the galaxy's spiral arms could ever possibly remain the same. The Old Ones had luxuriated in the certainty of their supremacy, victory upon victory, weaving a tapestry of arrogance. For ages, they held the Necrontyr threat comfortably at bay with casual mastery, casually limiting their expansion and dominance through arcane sciences beyond mortal comprehension. Their ownership of the labyrinthine Webway, an intricate highway weaving between the skeins of reality, itself offered an utterly insurmountable strategic advantage, allowing them to dictate every engagement, appear without warning, vanish before annihilation, their dominion seemingly eternal. When fragmentary intelligence filtered through distant sentry points speaking of bizarre metamorphosis among their ancient foes, it elicited only detached, clinical interest among the ancient minds, a phenomenon to be catalogued and dissected like any other cosmic oddity, devoid of threat assessment. Even the first unsettling encounters with deployment-hardened Necron warriors, implacable creatures shedding mechanical subsystems under fire, yet reassembling with cold precision, were perceived merely as novel technochemy, a puzzle whose solution would surely reveal itself under rigorous study, bolstering rather than threatening their perceived omnipotence. This sublime, multimillion-year stupor shattered like flawed crystal on the day the full, dreadful synergy of Necrons and C'tan descended upon a cherished Old One satellite world, where flesh, blood, and predictable kinetics once governed the battlefield. Now glittering necrodermis regiments attempted annihilation. Warriors kicked into scattered components by impossibly high-impact weaponry merely gathered their pieces and reformed. Blasphemous energies that had effortlessly shredded entire Necrontyr battle fleets washed against Necron phalanxes like mere atmospheric friction, scarring surfaces black only momentarily before self-repair nanoswarms flowed. Most terrible of all were the manifest Cetan, entities slaking their vast cosmic thirst upon the life force of stars. Nyadra Zatha, the Burning One, unleashed torrents of eldritch plasma across a continent-spanning fortress complex. From orbit, observers witnessed only a vast, cooling slag plain radiating unnatural heat. In that horrifying instant, millennia of effortless authority evaporated. Fear, cold and pungent and utterly alien to their mastered existence, flooded the ancient consciousnesses. Their legions crumbled before legions that could not die, animated by beings feeding on stellar nuclear fury. Stronghold after stronghold winked off the stellar maps so meticulously curated for generations, as spectral coffin ships of the Necrons flickered into existence, spilling remorseless soldier automata onto worlds they'd thought sanctuaries killers without exhaustion, without pity, without souls, just the execution programming and command protocols thrumming relentlessly within their necrodermis skulls. Yet even as their dominions slipped into bloody twilight, the Old Ones clung to one unassailable fortress nestled outside angular reality, the sanctum of the Webway. This complex, interdimensional pathways immune to conventional assault remained barred to the soulless invaders and their titanic patrons. It preserved a way to fall back, regroup, strike unexpectedly into the heart of Necron dominance, a celestial sanctuary ensuring ultimate defeat was still averted, a final retreat into multiplicity the enemy could not breach. For Nyadra Zatha, the perpetual agony of his fiery essence fixated beyond conquest was the tantalizing nearness of hidden dimensions geometries the Old Ones blithely used to dodge his cleansing flames. His unblemished rage and insatiable pursuit became the crucible for a technology of unthinkable violation. Through means erased by consuming time itself, he wrenched apart the barriers protecting dimensional sanity, rupturing the very walls of the Webway. His hate forged form into Dolmen Gate's crude, monolithic abominations of seething living stone that exerted dimensional pressures beyond any known architecture, brutally forcing entryways that ripped open unnatural wounds in the Webway's fabric. These were not elegant doors from masters of dimensional weaving, but jagged spears punched through celestial thoughtstuff itself, choking the warp ether interface violently. The Webway reacted as a living neural network fights catastrophic infection, attempting desperately to cauterize the intrusions, rerouting vital connections, severing contaminated junctures, an inexpressibly ancient mind attempting extreme self-imputation rather than surrender its structure. Hours after the first dusty, resonant tomb soldiers procedurally marched out from a Dolmen Gate breach deep inside the impervious Nexus Tellarus, the Old Ones gazed upon proof of their endless vulnerability. Their sanctuary had been defiled. The endless highways giving birth to strategic infinity were fatally compromised. Their cherished escape route and forward base network transformed into ambush alleys for the dead. Necron legions materialized with stark ontological dissonance inside the most sacred, resting places, bright galleries, centers of transcendent knowledge where no weapon had sounded within the eons. Old Ones who had charted stellar nurseries distant civilizations couldn't conceive found themselves frantically wielding defensive psychosomatic constructs against relentless machine skeletons phasing into their inner sanctums. Calculated, graceful strategy surrendered utterly to savage barricade fights and chaotic dimensional evacuations engineered in seconds. Every Webway breach became a tactical breakthrough, but also confirmation for Necrons, a proof of overcoming profound injustice. The device that mocked their immobility for entire wars became compromised architecture, delivering their ancient tormentors into the precision grasp of necrodermis hands. Warriors who helplessly watched Old Ones vanish into shimmering gateways millennia ago now pushed ravenously through those same portals, metal bodies electrically shrugging off the dimensional instability that shredded matter encountered within the unmapped avenues. Through this phase, the Cetan themselves largely refrained from physical entry. Immortal energies stretched perilously thin and irritated within abhorrent subspaces, requiring immense effort just to stabilize their necrodermal vessels. They directed primordial hatred from beyond the shock-bleeding breaches, synchronizing waves of attacks consuming material worlds while greedily consuming their stolen luminosity, lost worlds left behind in Necron's wake. The primeval instincts shaping the Old Ones, initial moves drove desperate withdrawal. Compromised Webway sections suffered catastrophic collapses, collapsing bridges slicing spatial ties millennia deep, ingenious affinities blasted to phase dust, Nexus asteroids erected before consciousness existed upon terrestrial worlds sacrificed desperately to halt inevitable marching consumption. Sever the node, stem the tide, contain the multiplicity corruption. Yet these panicked amputations proved woefully insufficient against diversifying demands. Necrons, guided by divine malice leveraging intelligence, distilled from consuming universal ages, mapped exploitative tensions within the Webway's ancient framework, pinpointing stress fractures built through operative stresses or conflicting dimensional pressures. They translated new dolmen gates simultaneously across dozens of suspected compromised nodes, from galactic rim deep into dense core sectors. The assault vectors overwhelmed oversight capacity entirely, flooding defensive assignments faster than they could be enacted. With annihilation no longer a remote possibility, with every sanctuary potentially becoming tomb ground, the Old Ones embraced solutions spilling beyond caution, beyond accepted ethical schema. If technology lay captive suddenly to Cetan reality schemes and martial strategy failed manifestly against the unliving trance army, perhaps untapped primordial forces could yield salvation-crafted creatures consciously injected into existence itself. They reached deep into the sublime genetic libraries and psychic potential sculpting fields, sapient species capable of dimensional perception. They accelerated projects aimed not towards enlightened evolution, but toward engineered weapons systems born from accelerated meddling, psychic warforms built to fight immediately. Foremost among their flickering hopelit creations were the Eldari. Not nurtured through evolutionary immersion across the slow drift of epochs like the ancient nightmares haunting galactic limb darker spheres, they emerged from cosmic biodeep focusing lenses and psychic intensity. Genesis acceleration, vaults literally metabolizing void-expressing intelligences designed for combat efficiency within decades, freshly decanted consciousness mastering realities higher than theirs as millennia failed bestowal elsewhere. This psychic hypersensitivity made them uniquely lethal against the new foe. The inherent emptiness defining every Necron mind struggled parsing the structured warp energies manifesting as Eldari battle sorcery strange techniques implanted from birth. The advanced Wraithbone amplifiers translated raw psychic potential, precisely calibrated to fracture command subroutines in Necrons. Conversely, the substantial Cetan, apparent constructs constructed entirely from material physics consolidation and quantum nuance energies, interacting predictably, where Psychana operated grossly beyond stable framework prediction, proved unexpectedly susceptible to directed ethereal conversion attacks bypassing titanic physical barriers. Barely maturing Eldari warriors manifested intricate blade constructs cleaving through living metal gristled transparently. Prescient seers mapping temporary Necron deployment vectors milliseconds before initiation, while their engineers silenced localized chronofields, creating exploitable moments for conventional forces commanding the closing phase. Emboldened, the Old Ones spun further martial descendants from genome and warp infusion formulae, the colossal kraken emerging as vast psychic resonators, absorbing ambient etheric feedback into localized singularity storms, the Rashin blending shadow manifestation with predictive causality collapse. Each creation pulsating entities conceived specifically for coordinated destruction, each staggering being merely existing scattered intense psychical impression disturbances across multiple Imperium channels, yet fighting jointly with flowing harmony, devastating previously impervious regiments. But interstellar ambition walked hand-in-hand with horror's newly conceived threat foreseen. The cognoscenti understood the delicate operation founding Imperium material depended steadily increasing consciousness, flowing through galaxy charts, new complexity patterns, born sophisticated awareness subjects, weaved interplay, thoughts emotions reflecting unstable eventually violating boundaries, kept protected by Old One guardianship, intellect archaic science. Discharging tremendous dimensions, specifically architecting forces, trained deploying energies aggressively against Necron's flooded environments impacting upon wild patterns tasting, instincts limitless conflict inherent newly activated species, such imbalance reverberated profoundly dissolving historical equilibrium. Structure became chaotic dissonance. Action psychic backlash burnt intrusive powers bitter immensity, amplifying exponentially collective dread ferocious passions, reality violently altering immaterial depths, digesting consciousness unimagined scales, activating something primordial spore coherent destruction incubating beneath. Within chambers shielded by thought-shielding fields, so dense even starlight forgot illumination, existed millennia uncounted. The eldest Old Ones witnessed unfolding resonant catastrophe warfares, amplified psychic signature, held emotional intensity, fundamentally experiencing slow ripples transformed inevitability, geomorphic tides dimensions braced slipping control subtle, nearly imperceptible shifts, compounding exponentially collapsing coherent certainties. Space wept painful kaleidoscopic fractures, rapidly expanding consciousness, lowering the pressure between universes, sincerely revealing infinite angles reflections, bleeding corrupted possibilities invasive torment. They understood introducing arrays immensely powerfully psychic race programs, deliberately encouraging warlike manipulation, ether potentially ignite instability unimaginable scale, paralyzing imposing devastation, countervailing escalating military obsessions, feudally crowded symbolic destiny. Voices counsel caution, restraint logic, devoid deep foreboding emphasize, proven technological paths troop, reserve exploitation alternative strategic pivot zones, existing rather than psychic gamble, potentially destabilize fragile dimensional interface beyond capacity smoothing danger, accumulates factoring exponentially proportionate level energy expenditure consequential psychic variabilities, active wills fighting survival, unleashed an immunity restrainer officidal doom looming. Yet gazing outward towards nearing green clusters crawling advancing relentless from breach coordinates, revealing daily strategic reversals, constant Necron incursions, exploding core vectors, initial preserving caution, transformed contradiction surrender infinitely worse mood argumentation, ceased debate silenced immense necessity consumed policy, amidst chilling moment despairing realization reality, didn't prize caution walking annihilations, threshold presses closer every dark hour cessation signals. Approaching faster thought possibly proceed without jeopardizing existence themselves. The Eldari learned voraciously, thirsting for the deepest secrets their creators initially dared impart about infinite residence echo layers beneath visible space. They focused natural sensitivity progression disciplined expression, staggering power previously partitioned ancient minds grading evolving defenses. Young Eldari warriors manifest structured psycholuminative weapons, carving through Necron formations dense as smoke. Psychic visions peeled layers possibility, predicting flank deployments, or pinpointing valuable tactical reprogramming nodes within enemy formations, initiating geometrically synchronized destruction routes. Thought crystals bent physical substance, constructing spires defensive barriers, spontaneously reacting enemy pressure, moving battlescape phasing kinetic energy, away embargoing ground-torn change composition, restricting mobility tactics, seemingly impossible organic armies, requiring vast technological expenditure moments. Within single life cycle, rising juvenile craftworld Navy commanders, deploying ancient old one-battle manipulation doctrines, instincts intuitively enriched tactical precognition sophistication. They shifted from curious newly created stars within dawn galactic consciousness into the premier decisive force capable contesting galactic ontologies forbidden masters. Alongside fading protection, ancient masters harnessing full destructive potential psychic, might synthesized reservoir technique, applied simultaneously desperate offensive pushed reclamation, compromised territory webway segments predation, contested aggressively battles mastery transcended conventional crisis, expressed collapse physical substance Necron operational heuristic shredded revealing pattern fragility, underlying conscious control structures. The Eldari, armored unfathomable light, manifest dimensional mist instantaneous aggression, groups isolating unsuspecting scouting elements. Their sorcerers expended bonding echoes cleansing psychic fire, melting dolmen gate anchoring microsingularity cores, collapsing entire combat tomb cohorts point vulnus defenseless. Energy blade champions sliced through lingering haunted implacably, pursuing expensive shock command phalanxes, striking critical resurrection matrices, protecting resurrection protocols, rendering vital Necron battlefield units terminally inert chaotic cascade, collapsing precisely choreographed maneuvering within localized engagement theater. More dramatic even concepts conceptualized, recalling imprisoning methalensis essence bizarre containment fields freezing temporal response systems endless moment shattering vessels formation coherence, became broken chains abandoned weeping suddenly assembly lost override securing disabling entire battlefield segments sacrificial disappearances, effectively neutralizing overwhelming numerical advantages intrinsic Necron doctrine. Initial startling expeditions, remodeling strategic defenses, stabilized disastrous conflict trajectory, demonstrating impossible feats, feasibility conceivable possibility reclaiming supremacy, thought obliterated ago illuminating slim bars, hope flicker light resistance providing footholds claws gradually consolidating shattered defensive positions, suddenly unexpected reclaiming thresholds, pushing declared militarily unsalvageable salients, experiencing incredible miraculous regeneration. Psychic amplifying confidence beings veterans thousand wars, witnessed revived between famously disillusionment proclaimed survival plausible eluding extinction momentarily. But groundswell hope, inevitably dissolved, inevitably unsustainable illusion, ephemeral ephemeris shining, before receding vanished tides irrevocable doom, approached irrespective momentary reversal. Celebrations rang conditioning, distinct perceptional realization, ink deepest parchment universal, foreseeing Prophet's millennial community, collectively failed receive warning, too late invisible shift, fundamental fabric, woven dangerously thin. Immense psychic emanations, perpetual billions, freshly born razors barometers, intensifying desperate conflicted pleasures, agony existence, profound scale resonated dimensional frequencies, metastasis in common materium volatile see emotional resonance, dominated fundamental emotional intensity, inherently psychological warfare, employing proportionally emotion, surging progressively amplifying underlying existential dread, undergoing tectonic paradigm shift caution, realized too neglected. Monumental arrogance reshape reality, unknowable consequence, various voices predicted imminent collapse, commence environmental stability, domain, never recovered ripple throat towards extinction event, incalculable magnitude, beyond warfare confined light particle measured foreseeable future burning, like touch paper eternity. Within the Grand Council geometries, beneath stream flood starlight millennia navigated mastery, profound now trembling resonances plague depth scholars eternal effortlessly dawn. Timelines fractured. Probability realities, gravity opposite implications ending incorporating corrupted sequences, collapsing historic possibilities, horizons simultaneously probable mapping collective nightmare lineage, initiated now slowly realized horrific understanding, unfolded upon unalterable course. Compassionate ancient observers watch creation turn destruction, impossibility foundation, impossible deny creation, unkept promise closer, infinitely unstoppable darkness crawling perception, unseen ending conceivable knowledge, currently possessed inexorable destiny, unfolding oblivion washing proximity, edge irreversible catastrophe, thought finalized vision, shared ancient mind simultaneously recognized absolute certainty, approaching apocalypse impossible restrain. Visible galaxy burned becoming tinder two consuming fires, destined only mutually assured incineration, supreme psychic throwdown, unleashed survival immaterial life, consuming absolute darkness, planned stillborn into sheer panic monstrous consummation, imminent stretched infinite culmination inevitable designs, something preceding existence goodness dissolved. Broken reflections wept. An irreversible darkness began relentless charge extinction consuming all. The whispers began first, subtle shifts amidst the cosmic currents that only the most attuned minds flickered with unease. The tranquil seas of the Imperium, a deep reservoir of formless potential the old ones had navigated with masterful grace for eons untold, began to stir like restless dreams infected by fever. Patterns that had drifted, ancient and benign, entities of pure light or untroubled void, felt a new hunger sharpen within their incorporeal essence. They sensed the roiling storm of violent emotion bleeding across the dimensional veil, a psychic stench rising thick and cloying from 1,000 blazing battlefields, where metal met flesh and fire consumed ancient worlds. The ceaseless hatred, the ironclad will to annihilation radiating from the Cathan Necron legions, the frantic desperation, burning courage and primal fury of the old ones, warrior offspring this psychic miasma, savage and raw, drew them closer. They began to coalesce, not randomly, but drawn to specific frequencies of pain, terror, blinding rage, threads of malice weaving a darker tapestry within the warp. These entities ceased to be spectators. They changed shape, developing nascent awareness with jagged edges, becoming feeders, predators lured by the immense psychic banquet unfolding within the material realm. This nascent corruption did not remain confined to the ethereal. It bled back. The Eldari, whose finely wrought minds sailed the psychic tides like vessels of purest thought, began to experience disturbing visions. Their revered seers, communing with the Imperium for guidance or strategic insight, recoiled from glimpses they dared not fully describe. Shapes writhed just beyond perception, something enormous and cold shifting ponderously in the murk, reacting to their tentative psychic probes not with indifference or passive flow, but with a slow, undeniable turning, a chilling sense of attention. Purpose nascent and malign, similar ripples struck other creations. Tight-knit Kiba enclaves, havens once of calm contemplation, erupted with shocking outbreaks of inexplicable madness, psychers collapsing midshint or turning on brethren with feral desperation. The Ration, ever vigilant against psychic peril, felt the subtle rise of their own powers swelling within them, a deadly gift becoming stronger, wilder, unspooling like frayed wire. They accelerated their development of complex psychic rituals, intricate geometries of focus and suppression chanted with increasing urgency, sensing the profound danger in any unfettered connection to the Imperium's darkening currents. As the war ground on, consuming world after world for centuries that blurred into millennia, the old ones found themselves besieged on both sides of existence. In the cold steel grip of the material realm, they faced the inexorable Necron tide. Beyond the ephemeral veil, they battled the burgeoning anarchy of a dimension they themselves had weaponized. Their greatest asset, the psychic gift embedded in their creations, was metamorphosing into a double-edged sword, its mangled backstroke carving fissures into the very fabric of reality they had dedicated their existence to protecting, hoping to guide its flourishing. Cornered, pressured by this spiraling existential dread, the Eldar race made a decision etched in the deepest reluctance. Abandoning psychic warfare meant certain defeat against the unyielding Necron war machine. Instead, they would refine the blade. They would forge newer, more resilient models. If this conflict, as whispers intimated, was merely the opening salvo in a war spanning eons beyond calculation, they required self-sufficient legions, warriors needing no direct old one hand upon the helm, capable of enduring eternities of unending strife. From the cosmic forges of their dwindling ingenuity emerged beings like the Croc Giants, hulking monuments to sheer physical mass, their scaled leviathan frames encased raw power capable of shattering continents. But their true genius lay within, a unique nexus of minds generating a shared Gestalt field. Where the Eldari cultivated individual mastery, the Croc embodied collective psychic synergy, their power visibly swelling, crackling in the air like gathering thunder as their numbers grew. This coalescent energy permitted feats blurred through reality, bending spacetime under the sheer weight of their combined psychic will. Alongside the Croc lumbered the Joe, small, vibrant bundles of orange fur, possessing an intuitive grasp of technology so instinctive, so profound it bordered on the miraculous. They could coax impossible harmony from disparate elements, forge and adapt weapons with the effortless grace of sculpture, their understanding inherent as breathing. Each distinct species Croc, Joe, and those crafted concurrently embodied a divergent evolutionary solution to the same unsolvable theorem, crafting warriors capable of defying the Necrons' remorseless, deathless advance without crumbling beneath their overwhelming technological dominance. The Old Ones poured the very marrow of their fading power, their hoarded resources shrinking alarmingly, into these nascent projects. Their own ultimate survival, they understood with icy clarity, hung tethered to the success of these final hopes, these desperate guardians flung onto the anvil of a galaxy at war. They could not perceive, obscured by immediate desperation, the terrible irony of their accelerated creation. Each newly birthed psychically active species, each Croc tribe unleashing their thunderous field, each Eldari seer piercing the veil, each pulse of ration ritual psychery, acted as psychic bellows. They pumped colossal volumes of raw, reactive emotion and thought energy into the deeper immaterium. The oxygenal currents swelled into vast, conflicting whirlpools. Calm potential transformed into a violently turbulent ocean, choked with energies that reverberated with the agonies and hatreds and fleeting hopes of billions locked in desperate warfare, all bleeding unseen into that psychic dimension. Within this chaotic psychic maelstrom, concentrations began to form with alarming persistence. Similar emotional resonances, oceans of hatred coalescing here, continents of burning ambition forming there, vast, suffocating swamps of febrile despair begin to solidify. Embryonic cores of conscious malevolence stirred, nascent entities feeding and growing fiercely potent on specific psychic frequencies consumed like sustenance. They were the first glimmers of the warped predators, entities imbued with elemental hungers that would one day be revered, reviled, and placated as gods by races yet unborn. The war in heaven, born as a clash of titanic material civilizations vying for stellar dominion, was mutating horrifically into something far vaster, far more consequential. A conflict transcending its origins, beginning to permanently warp the fundamental relationship between the tangible universe and the dimensions swimming beyond the veil. It forged the noxious crucible where the next iteration of suffering would form, the Chaos Gods, beings who would emerge eons later to torment legions of future souls. Unknowingly, in their frantic scramble for mere survival, the Old Ones set machinery into motion that would twist reality and cascade into horrifying echoes for tens of millions of years yet to come. The warp's dark metamorphosis unfurled insidiously at first, a slow corruption unnoticed until it touched vital flows. Old Ones navigators seasoned in herding ships through the Immaterium's gentle highways blinked in consternation. Familiar rapids now bore dangerous eddies. Stable currents shifted subtly yet destructively, forcing complex recalibrations to established pathways. Eldari seers recounted disturbing nocturnal journeys, not the curated dreamways of prophecy, but glimpses of unsettling configurations prowling the psychic deeps, forms that actively recoiled or reached back with cold, alien intent. Even the otherwise resolute Croc war parties experienced unsettling anomalies amidst the familiar chaos of combat. Moments when their shared Gestalt field, typically channeled into focused concussive force or protective barriers, suddenly buckled or flared uncontrollably, manifesting bizarre, dissonant phenomena unintended by their creators. Landscapes flickering like bad signals, sounds tearing reality, kinetic energies going awry. For the harried Old Ones, besieged constantly by material losses to the Necrons, these were dangerous yet manageable complications. Problems to be logged, studied, and dissected once the immediate crushing imperative of the Necron advance had finally been subdued. Their focus remained resolutely fixed on the drumbeats echoing across the stellar battlefields, a catastrophic oversight they would mourn with bitter finality. The signs were the death throes of a plane of existence. The primordial energies of the Imperium, reactive, psychic, and elemental, roused from eons of dormancy by the constant psychic hurricane of galaxy-wide warfare, reacted with increasing sentience. Obscure concentrations of pure psychic resonance that had drifted in uncaring equilibrium began displaying startling coherence. Entities previously existing as passive, formless pools of similar emotional essence, raw, untethered hope, blind rage, fathomless sorrow, began to thicken, develop rudimentary awareness aimed solely at the source of their newfound vitality. They became hunters fine-tuned to frequency. Older beings, lethargic observers since time primordial, sensing the fundamental nature of their home dimension twisting into something hostile and predatory, were forced to adapt or be consumed. Passive guardians became opportunistic predators driven by newfound survival instincts. The psychic luminescence radiating from psychically active mortal minds became irresistible beacons. The brightest stars were the newly crafted races. The clearest early casualties were inevitably the isolated psychers, individuals whose profound warp connection turned vulnerability to a fatal flaw. Reports filtering to the hallowed councils of shriving Eldari seers arrived alongside shattered wretches, rendered utterly catatonic or raving, their minds hollowed temples echoing with nonsensical whispers and chilling promises spoken by inhuman intelligences clawing at sanity's periphery. Kiba enclaves witnessed terrifying viral outbreaks of untethered fury, or despair overwhelming their most psychically gifted, madness leaping from mind to mind within the tightly bonded communes. Stability dissolved into shared psychosis. Even the collective focused Croc weren't immune. Their weird boys, focal points for directing the tribe's energy, began manifesting strangely obsessive preoccupations or bursts of uncontrolled power that twisted their comrades' creations into bizarre, dangerous parodies. The fragile equilibrium was failing everywhere. As the massive conflict ground on with relentless savagery across the galaxy, uncounted souls perishing hourly on countless grim fields, the psychic metastasize within the Imperium reached its lethal apotheosis. The barrier separating dimensions, once thick, predictable, and enduring as bedrock, began to weaken, becoming dangerously porous where psychic effluvia concentrated most thickly. Zones where titanic battles had spilled oceans of psychic pain, terror, and fanaticism, where emotional residue stained reality itself, became weak points, thin, incandescent scabs on the flank of creation. Through these torn rents, weakened by the very energies of war, crawled a terror both factions had failed to foresee: the enslavers. These warp-born entities hadn't merely adapted, they had evolved specifically for this surging psychic landscape, their entire physiology designed for deactivation and parasitism of sentient psyches. They were lured with irresistible potency to the blazing psychic beacon of a potent mind, drifting through the weakening veil not as predators needing to rend flesh, but as conquerors needing hosts. Monumentally different from the impulsive, opportunistic warp predators gifting isolation, mindlessness, or death, the enslavers possessed terrifying organization and purpose. They had developed intricate mechanisms for stable dimensional transit, parasitic reproductive processes achievable only within the material universe, utilizing a host's body. They represented an infestation engineered by the chaos they now exploited. Horror dawned catastrophically on an Eldar world precariously near the grinding frontline against the Necrons. Eyewitness accounts, laced with profound trauma, described a revered seer woman collapsing abruptly during a sacred community meditation trance. Her body arced and writhed as if gripped by invisible volts, limbs snapping in unnatural directions, facial features melting and reforming in tortured grimaces, as an external psychic force of horrifying magnitude overwhelmed her essence. Agony became transformation. Her physical form stretched impossibly, bones protruding through distended flesh, luminous cracks splitting skin as she expanded into a grotesque, living arch glowing with unnatural energies. She wasn't dead, she was repurposed, a pulsating gateway ripped open through her very soul. From this abominable portal slewed wetly, the first enslavers manifest onto the physical plane, entities resembling obscene combinations of cephalopod and starfish forged from iridescent plasma. Without hesitation, they drifted towards the mentally radiant Eldar nearby. Their collective psychic assault overwhelmed defenses instantaneously. Psychically sensitive minds became enslaved playthings, controlled absolutely. The horror cascaded exponentially. Each subverted psyker became another portal, more enslavers vomiting forth, seizing new hosts to build yet more gateways. no warning escaped the doomed world. The exponential tidal wave of psychic domination and biomechanical horror drowned all organized resistance within cycles, self-replicating terror annihilating millennia of civilization so thoroughly that when investigators dispatched by the Old Ones arrived days later, guided by sudden silence, they confronted an atrocity. The graceful spires lay smashed, the exquisite gardens choked with slime. Air vibrated with the buzzing psychic drone of enslavers, moving amongst vast crowds of psychically dominated thralls, Eldar reduced to hollow-eyed puppets, tending crystalline nests and vacanted mechanical constructs. The bright flame of that once-proud Eldar world was coldly extinguished, its people reduced to food and components for the new masters. This pattern repeated with accelerating, devastating frequency. Not dozens, but hundreds of worlds previously deemed bastions of hope swiftly fell. Each captured psyker became both a violated victim and a terrifying epidemic vector, their ravaged bodies grotesquely transformed into stable dimensional punctures, discharging more enslavers. The Old Ones, masters of life evolution witnessing this plague consume their galaxy piece by agonizing piece, recognized it with chilling clarity. This wasn't just another battlefield loss, it was an absolute extinction event unfolding for all sentient life. Dimly, the crushing irony reverberated through their ancient consciousness. Their greatest creations, those magnificent warrior psychics forged as swords against the Necrons, from the Eldari seers to the crook shamans, to the Ration battlesions, every single adept, every potential canvas for psychic expression now represented the universe's greatest vulnerability, a colossal security risk. They were living gateways. Sheltered deep within dwindling enclaves, still holding against the Necron tides, guttering candle flames fanned by despair, the eldest remnants of the Old One conclaves convened. Beings of such ancient wisdom they recalled churning stellar nurseries seeding primal life, architects who had fostered countless species on innumerable worlds, now hunched in stark clarity before the abyss weakening beneath them. The choices were unspeakable. Some voices, cracked with anguish, advocated atrocity, the systematic extermination of all psychically active individuals among their beloved creations, a genocide conducted solely to strip away the psychic beacons and gateways the enslavers required. Others whispered evacuation, a desperate, flee into the absolute void beyond the galactic rim, forsaking everything won and nurtured to carve refuge in sterile emptiness behind impenetrable psychic wards, conceding the galactic core to it. Heartbreak etched into every decision, debating the sacrifice of children they'd ushered to sentience. Ultimately, they chose a third path: refinement becomes salvation. They would forge new guardians, deliberately engineered resilience woven into their psychic fabric, resistant specifically to enslavers' psychic entangling, yet retaining the vital combat abilities against the still marauding Necrons. These creations would carry the ember of their legacy, inheritors who might endure long after the Old One's light vanished. Among these vital, final designs rose enhanced crook strains, boasting immeasurably increased psychic resilience through further strengthened collective fields and redundant psychic grids, their enormous minds banded against individual subversion. The Joe, already paragons of technological intuition, underwent critical refinements. Their already uncanny grasp was honed to near-miraculous pathos, transformed into biological vaults safeguarding irreplaceable knowledge vaults. But speed was a luxury the galaxy no longer afforded. Even as the desperate genetic engineers raced against extinction within shielded laboratories, worlds ignited like dry tinder. The Enslaver's Plague possessed an exponentially horrific vector map, wholly immune to conventional quarantine. The web of psychic connections linking Old One bastions and their allied worlds pulsed like festering arteries. Entire prosperous solar systems, renowned as hubs of civilization or formidable strongholds, vanished from communication in terrifyingly compressed timeframes, falling silent as psychic screams faded into the hungry hum of the invaders. The beautiful, intricate Webway, once the undisputed crown jewel of the Old One's mastery, a universe-spanning network of fast transit channels nestled cozily beside the hostile Imperium, became an unimaginable liability. Enslavers learned, with terrifying alacrity, to perceive psychic resonance bleeding through the luminous paths like telltale heat signatures. They swarmed nexus points well protected from Necron legions for centuries, breaching through psychic aberrations, overwhelming defenders lost in internal squabbles turned into forced killing troughs orchestrated from within. Gateways once inviolate crudely exploded inwards, vomiting waves of bioplasma horrors. The ancient galleries echoed not with serene thought travel, but with the wet crunch of ambush. Slowly choking their own territory's arteries, the Old Ones were forced to enact brutal surgical strikes. With hearts heavy as collapsing stars, they sent automata detonators deep inside network junctions and vital warp gates, achieving Pyrrhic victories. They severed spinal connections linking star systems they could no longer reach, hoping desperately this self-mutilation would choke the spreading interdimensional infection. Containment through voluntary amputation. For the Cathan Necrons and their silent star god masters slumbering within shielded chthonic vaults, the enslavers presented a conundrum wrapped within an unforeseen boon. Their age-old organic adversaries were being systematically eradicated by these voracious interdimensional parasites, freeing entire sectors ripe for rapid domination. Worlds that should have necessitated costly ground campaigns fell silent, offering disarmingly easy conquest. Yet this plague violently disrupted the Cetans' carefully orchestrated feeding schedules. Plainsaw, formerly teeming with vibrant sentient life energy, sustaining them for centuries to come, were now psychically sterilized wastelands utterly depleted by the enslavers' process. Harvestable populations reduced to scant herds of mindless thralls wandering purposeless over bones of poisoned landscapes, rendered useless husks barely holding energy enough to exist. A resource famine compounded military opportunity, forcing strategic recalculation. The Old Ones fought their desperate rearguard action with the stoic determination of an architectless dynasty, witnessing their cosmos-altering masterpiece consumed by architectonic decay. Their final scattered sanctuaries, transformed into multi-layered bastions of absolute, hope-starved defense, layered shields, reacting violently against both the raw necrodermis reshaping physics and the invasive psychic pulses emanating from approaching enslavers' swarms. Reality itself locally twisted beneath potent wards, maintained by fading Elder Guardians bleeding out their last coherence. They poured every remaining erg of power into realizing their Guardian prototypes, rushing deployment of bare-lightisted legions to stave off erosion. Survival became a stepwise percentage calculation, preserving themselves secondary to preserving the last seeds they cultivated, knowing these represented their soul enduring echo once certainty inevitably arrived. The deepest tragedy lay not in battlefield sacrifice, but in enforced abandonment. When enslavers were detected on a world, often a former stronghold, vibrant with loyal triplihelix life springing from Old One meddling, response protocols were brutally efficient, immediate, total, absolute isolation. Path-cutting fleets would scorch perimeter approaches. Any escape vessel turned ignominious funeral pyre falling back inward before quarantine solidified utterly. Worse inevitably followed. Viral bombardment or calculated planet-cracking weapons unleashed shockwaves sufficient to pulverize biospheres into glowing trivia fields. Entire ecologies annihilated, tens of billions upon billions of cherished lives, tiny insected researchers, lithe warrior castes, burgeoning herbivore herds nurtured since proto-sentience annihilated moments before the enslavers could seize them and open breaches, murdering family to prevent infection. Allocating tragedy in obscenely vast sacrificial loads, hopelessly prolonging awareness for those who ordered mercy killings. This became their final constant calculation as territory tightened like a closing fist. Gradually, irrevocably, awareness settled upon them, heavy as galactic debris. With numbers catastrophically diminished, stronghold locations recorded in a single crystal lock, they perceived the dreadful scale of their self-inflicted downfall. In sculpting those magnificent psychic races as swords against the Necron deathless legions, their brilliant improvisation had wondrous conception unraveling unforeseen catastrophe. They had fatally agitated the serene womb space of the Imperium, transforming it into the roiling predatory hostility later eras named simply the Warp. The magnificent, intricate weapon systems they had woven proudly into the genetic fabric of their charges inadvertently acted as lockpicks. Each psychic birth pulse, every significant perilous ritual, every psionic discharge enhanced the resonance, opening fissures inexorably wider, lowering barriers that ultimately permitted their eventual conqueror's passage. Creating heroes blossomed a plague. Its infection utterly destroyed everything they ever touched. The ultimate moments of the Old Ones slipped deep within shrouds of perpetual mystery and loss. Disparate legends flicker briefly. Some recount a final titanic convulsion across one last fortress world, shielded fortress sectors grinding beneath geothermal pressure. Echoing the traditional closing ceremony, grand architecture dissolving around surviving architect philosophers and newly emerged guardian species, united facing inconceivably masses. Endless waves of faceless Necron constructs fencing in gravitifying tides of irreducible psychic predators, chewing reality open wherever they passed. Others murmur of meticulously planned exodus before the noose fully tightened, rarest artifacts preserved, cherished seed ships filled, senior consciousness absorbing vital protocols before departing gravity wells forever, departing the galaxy they forged, turning poisonous to their kind, fleeing borders set implacably across unfathomably vast gulfs separating even galactic superclusters. seeking undiscovered universes far beyond the conceptual, as well as physical reach of Necron harvesters and enslavers' hunger alike. Definitive is this. Their civilization, a galaxy shepherding majority spanning time countless since planetary molten birth past solidity, ended. They were the breath ended forever holding contemplative song. Beloved webways grew poison roots forcing their relinquishment. Greatest sanctuaries subverted foundations, collapsed into filthy slurry, where now crawled blasphemous shapes. Places of profound meditation, timeless halls vibrating creation harmonics, became tombs draped with unnatural tentacles drawing vibrational disaster. The universe's supreme biologists ended as victims, trapped inside dreadful constructs of repellent evolution, for which their science manifestly held keys of conception, forming conceptual lock. Conquered ultimately not by the ancient adversaries they had battled materially throughout existence, but by the previously unimaginable progeny, birthed of using reality as their percussion instrument, creating vibrations beyond scope, eroding dimension unstoppably beneath them, until they drowned inside collapsing world bridge. The legacy embraced contradictory divinity, matrix birthing realms allowing survival, destined inevitably to consume universe. Masters giving existence greatness fell screaming poured dimensions collapse's own darkness. The echoing silence of cosmic devastation settled over the galaxy, a chilling emptiness where the grand symphony of the Old Ones had once resonated. Their reign, millions of years in the weaving, was over, extinguished utterly, or fled into the impenetrable dark beyond the galactic rim. Victorious by default yet ruling a hollow ruin, the Necrons and their starborn Catani masters surveyed a prize already devoured from within. Like a plague of cosmic locusts, the Slaver scourge continued its relentless consumption, world after teeming world reduced to psychic husks, echoing with the madness of enthralled minds. The magnificent psychic children of the vanished architects, the Eldari, the nascent Orks, the Jekero, were cast adrift on the tide of annihilation. Scattered like stellar dust, their populations gutted, their very existence a precarious whisper against the howling void. Yet even in the absolute depth of this cosmic midnight, seeds of desperate survival took root. The Eldari, precious inheritors clutching fragments of their creator's wisdom, found paths to shield their souls from the enslaver's hungry touch, clinging to existence long enough to glimpse a future inheritance. The Orks, bereft of the Old One's guiding hand, felt their sophisticated structures crumble, their minds devolving under the relentless pressure of survival instinct. What emerged was a brutal, elemental echo, the nascent green tide of Orks, their engineered psychic resonance, a brutal, unconscious weapon echoing the conflict they were made for. The Jekero became wandering keepers of secrets, their tiny hands driven by an innate, untutored brilliance that nurtured sparks of impossibly complex technology, fragile vessels carrying shards of an ancient science into the encroaching dark. And far deeper than mere space, within the seething, corrupted wound that had been the Imperium, the cataclysmic alterations unleashed during the eons of celestial war raged unchecked. The calm sea became a tempestuous ocean of raw psychic energy, a monster shaped by the agonized screams and primal fears of the galaxy's remaining sentient sparks. Within that chaos, predators born of this transformation stirred, honing their awareness, feasting on suffering, evolving into the vile entities later ages would name demons, and in terror, elevate to the status of gods. The war in heaven had ceased its open conflict, but the consequences were shackles binding cosmic history for 60 million years to come. The Old Ones, in their frantic bid to survive, had not merely fought a war. They had hammered the fundamental nature of reality itself into terrifying new shapes, scarring both the material realm and the warp forever. While the Slaver plague advanced like a psychic tide, the galaxis-penning dominion of the Old Ones shrunk to desperate nodes of resistance. Fortified worlds, glimmering bubbles of defiance in the encompassing ruin, represented the final, desperate gamble. Sanctums where precious slivers of knowledge, genetic blueprints for a million species, and the living spark of their myriad creations might be preserved a final hope to rebuild or, failing all else, to ensure an enduring legacy whispering into the deep future. Within these final bastions, the dwindling remnants of the Old Ones gathered their most brilliant minds and their most potent children. Repository cities pulsed with latent life, archives filled with priceless genetic samples from conquered worlds, seed vaults promising future genesis, and crystalline matrices humming with condensed wisdom from epochs beyond measure. Concentric layers of impossible defenses shielded these treasures, barricades forged from alien alloys, psychic wards shimmering with contained power, legions of guardian species meticulously crafted solely for this final, apocalyptic stand. Greatest among these redoubts, concealed within the dwindling knots of still functional Webway gates, was the world Eldari legend would name Ishakhin the Cradle of Tomorrow. Within its soaring crystal spires and impossibly complex ecosystems, the wisest remaining Old Ones, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, convened to enact their extinction contingency plans. Where once their numbers had commanded galaxies, now mere thousands remained. The elite defenders of these last stands stood ready. Advanced Eldari seers, minds honed alongside their Old One mentors, maintained intricate psychic veils to shroud their sanctuaries from the baleful awareness of hunting enslavers. Sophisticated Krork commanders, ancestors distant from the brutes they would become, orchestrated grim defense perimeters against the simultaneous horrors of advancing Necron legions and Esliver-controlled thralls. Jakaro engineering covens, tiny paws remarkably deft, perpetually reknit the fraying threads of their masters' ancient technology, the very machines upon which breath remained. Most profoundly tragic were the youngest of the experiments, children of the apocalypse themselves, sprouted solely for this unfolding doom. Re-engineered versions of earlier species stood guard, twisted to better resist psychic subjugation, alongside entirely new, rapidly evolved races designed only for brutal, sacrificial defense. These last children knew nothing of peace or creation. They were birthed into open graves, instruments of preservation in a dying empire. Above the world known as Ishakhin, the atmosphere shimmered perpetually under the constant barrage of repelled physical attacks and the insidious, ceaseless probing of Eslaver minds seeking psychic entry. Within shielded enclaves, Old One scientists, beings who had coaxed life from dust, labored frantically against impossible odds. They strained to dissect the Eslaver curse, to find some fracture in their psychic domination, perhaps sever the creature's very connection to the infernal warp. Time was a noose tightening relentlessly. Each fleeting moment brought grim tidings of another outpost extinguished, another ally consumed by either relentless Necron advance or the suffocating tide of Eslaver infestation. The glorious Webway, once stitching the entire cosmos like luminous threads, had contracted to a handful of fragile, fiercely guarded tunnels linking the dwindling strongholds. Communication with lost worlds dwindled into static, then chilling silence as region after region fell off the map of reality. In the face of this oblivion, the Old Ones clung to their fundamental creed. They nurtured life. They curated consciousness. Even as their civilization fragmented around them, they remained gardeners of galactic potential, preserving the genetic souls of extinct worlds, pouring their fading strength into guiding their created species one last time. If extinction was their fate, they would die planting seeds for the future they foresaw a galaxy, vibrating with the chorus of diverse, intelligent life. Sensing vulnerability that echoed across the void, the Necrons unleashed their final assaults. Tomb ships assembled like spectral fleets above the defiant worlds, discharging legions of deathless soldiers in relentless waves. The Katten themselves, cosmic entities of terrifying power, descended into the fray. Stars whimpered and died at their whim, entire planets ripped screaming from their orbits, incomprehensible forces unraveling biological and technological complexities at a fundamental level. Yet perhaps even these godlike assaults could have been held, shouldered by the sheer resolve honed over millennia of war. The Old Ones and their guardians had, over countless struggles, forged counters to Necron might. Psychic lances disrupted reanimation protocols bubbling within necrodermis shells. Entropic fields destabilized the eerie unyieldingness of living metal. With immense psychic exertion, the Katten themselves could be momentarily blasted from their borrowed metallic frames. The true, the ultimate death came from the sanctuary's very heart. In a cosmic irony bitter as stellar ash, the colossal psychic power required to sustain the shield's energies poured forth in torrents by the Old Ones, and their psychically gifted children became beacons impossible to ignore amidst the warp's dark hunger. The death of Ishakhin exemplifies this hideous paradox. For months, the defenders held the line against the Necron onslaught. The Old Ones stood personally on the ramparts, releasing powers that bent reality in their desperation. Beside them, Eldari guardians, psychic blades flashing beams of pure will, severed lifeless metal warriors by the Legion. Then came the breach no shield could block, a failure from within. Young Eldari seer, part of the vital psychic shield maintenance network, collapsed mid-shift. By the time the stillness of her mind registered, the infestation had already ignited. Hours later, the first vile enslavers emerged from her horrifically transformed body, immediately enslaving nearby psychically sensitives with chilling ease. Plague ignited exponentially, every new husk becoming a gateway for more warp-borne parasites clawing into material reality. Emergency protocols snapped into place. Sectors screeched shut, personnel and essential knowledge vaults evacuated frantically. But the breach came too close to the Sanctum's psychic nexus core. As more defenders succumbed to the internal horror, cracks snaked through the protective screens. Necrons, drawn like mechanical sharks to spilled blood, intensified their assault, forcing a devastating two-front war against foes both without and within. In the world's deepest heart, where the eldest and wisest Old Ones maintained their dwindling command nexus, a terrible decision settled like final snow. Ishakhin was lost. Their focus shifted now not to victory, but to preservation, salvaging irreplaceable knowledge, ensuring the flight of promising life. Evacuation orders pulsed through surviving comm networks, gathering vessels to the designated refugees and crucial genetic and intellectual cargo. The final moments were etched in sacrifice. Old Ones whose lives spanned galactic epochs chose to stand as shields for the younger species they had brought into being, buying time with their incalculable presence. Eldari guardians formed human walls in the antechambers, selling their lives breath by breath for the evacuation ship's escape. Inside the vast biological archives, scientists worked with frantic precision, compressing eons of accumulated understanding into dense crystalline matrices their descendants might one day unravel. As the last shuttles readied to flee, a small circle of the supremely ancient gathered at the world's self-destruction core. These beings who had witnessed the ignition of suns and nurtured consciousness in dust prepared their final gesture. They would overload the reality-warping engines powering the sanctuary, triggering a catastrophic implosion not merely of matter, but of spacetime itself. They would erase Ishakhin, incinerate it utterly from existence, a sacrifice denying its corpse to either predator while cloaking the escape of their desperate legacy ships. No hesitation. As Necron forces burst through the inner shields and enslavers corrupted the last defenders, the dimensional engines crossed the critical threshold. A flash of annihilation, blinding and profound, consumed the star system. Where Ishakhin had stood, flickering defiantly against the dark, only a churning, unstable dimensional scar remained, a memory carved into the fabric of the universe. Across the dwindling network of strongholds, similar tragedies unfolded. Some fell entirely to the metallic tide, others to the creeping psychic plague within their sanctums. More chose the path of Ishakhin, denying existence itself to the conquerors, activating dimensional scuttling charges grim and absolute. One by one, the vital stars of the galaxy's first and greatest civilization blinked out into cold extinction. It seemed the old ones were erased, utterly ended. Yet whispers linger, cosmic rumors enduring through eons. Of successful escapes, old ones fleeing the galaxy entirely through specialized, isolated Webway gates vanishing into the intergalactic void. Voyagers on starships designed for nothing less than the journey between dying islands of matter. Perhaps others retreated into hidden depths of the damaged Webway itself, sealing themselves into eternal stasis cocoons, waiting for a dawn they might never see. Most tantalizing, fragments within cryptic Eldari archives hint that some sought refuge within the monstrous Imperium itself, using their godlike psychic mastery to transpose their consciousness into pure war-personant patterns, existing as echoes. True beings of immense age and power might still linger in the chaotic medium that destroyed them, observers from the warp's heart, witnesses to the galaxy their sacrifice and failure forever shaped. Their ultimate fate remains the supreme mystery woven through galactic time. Their empire, a civilization dwelling beyond the comprehension of those who came later, vanished almost without trace. But they left indelible markers. Their bloodline endured in the species they designed. Their technological sorceries lingered in fragments and echoes. Most profoundly, the fundamental laws of reality itself remained scarred by their desperate war. Among their creations, only a few endured the post-apocalyptic crucible. The Eldari, perhaps the most cherished, held enough inherited wisdom to negotiate the psychic wilderness of the plague's aftermath. Inheriting the ruins, they would forge a shining, then doomed, empire fueled by fading fragments of their maker's knowledge. The Orks had shed sophistication like dead skin in the harsh environment, becoming the Orks, vibrant yet savage tides whose psychic resonance became an energy field defining their violent existence, a distorted shadow of its original purpose, yet potent nonetheless. The Jacaro became orphans of technology, their gifts seeming miraculous magic to simpler minds. Other client races simply vanished, consumed by the final cataclysms or fading into forgotten isolation. 60 million years of darkness unfolded, cycles of empires rising and falling into dust. Yet the Old One's signature remains burned into the universe's bedrock. As the grim interminable war of the future rages, consuming stars and souls in an endless cycle of death, shadows are stirred awake from eon-spanning slumbers. The most visceral remnant endures, the Webway itself, that vast, labyrinthine network of psychic pathways linking the stars across impossible distances. Though fractured and diminished from its primeval glory, this staggering feat of psychic engineering remains vital, offering the inheriting Eldari a shielded highway through a universe constantly snarling with predatory. The bone singers of the modern Eldari, their fingers tracing shapes learned at the dawn of time before humanity even grasped stone tools, weave the very stuff of dreams into reality. They repair the fractured veins of the Old One's greatest gift, the Webway, that labyrinthine network coiling through dimensions unbound by the crude laws governing real space or the turbulent madness of the warp itself. when the Eldari artisan meticulously shapes Wraithbone at a damaged gateway, smoothing the luminous material as it hums with resonant psychic power. She unknowingly channels energies along pathways painstakingly designed and laid down 60 million years prior by those unfathomable architects. This staggering achievement in dimensional engineering, this interstellar lattice offering sanctuary within the very heart of the galaxy's most lethal regions, remains utterly beyond replication. Not even the Emperor, that towering pinnacle of human intellect and latent psychic, might steeped in knowledge lost to all others, could duplicate the subtle, seamless mastery of the ancient progenitors. His own desperate endeavor to carve a species-specific webway beneath the foundations of the Imperial Palace on Terra ultimately shattered in a debacle of catastrophic proportions, a grim footnote underscoring the cosmic distance between mortal ambition, however lofty, and the instinctive genius wielded by the Old Ones as if it were child's play. Fragments of their otherworldly technology, however, persist as unsettling echoes of that forgotten apex, surfacing sporadically across the scarred face of the Milky Way in the benighted 41st millennium. Such discoveries invariably ignite frenzied wars of acquisition or annihilation, as hungry factions clash over relics whose true purposes remain terrifyingly opaque, yet reeking of impossible power. The ancient, covetous Necron overlord Trazyn the Infinite jealously guards one such prize, the empathic obliterator. This weapon harnesses Old One principles to unleash psychic tremors radiating from a slain victim, manifesting empathetic devastation that annihilates others sharing similar thoughts and ambitions across the field of battle. Elsewhere, buried deeper still within the galactic shadows, forgotten terraforming constructs continue their methodical transformations of forsaken planets, reshaping atmospheres and continents according to long-abandoned blueprints, their original intent erased by the passage of eons. Psychic amplification devices lie dormant beneath the crusts of outwardly meager worlds, capable of sudden, inexplicable activation when triggered by stimuli encoded into their essences when mankind's progenitors were still scampering arboreal mammals. The fundamental vocabulary of these artifacts defies the comprehension of even the most brilliant minds of the current age, humans, Eldari, or otherwise. Where contemporary science painstakingly dissects the material from the immaterial, treating them as distinct realms requiring unique sets of rules, the devices of the Old Ones embraced a unified singularity of being, physical components dancing to the tune of psychic impulses, energy states coalescing into matter and dispersing back into potential with effortless ease. This intricate symbiosis, however, laid the foundation for catastrophe. The gentle sea of psychic potential that once constituted the warp was corrupted into a howling realm of predatory entities during the cosmic hellfire of the War in Heaven. This fundamental perversion, born of the Old Ones' final desperate gambits to avert extinction at the hands of the burgeoning Necrontyr and their silent, startling allies, now defines the spiritual reality for every soul in the galaxy. Every psyker drawing upon those tainted currents for power, every navigator peering through hellfire to steer a ship, every supplicant crying out to warp entities in misguided worship, they all interact with a nightmare dimension, irrevocably twisted by the ancient creator's violent passing. Speculation whispers through the corridors of forbidden lore that perhaps some Old Ones survived, hidden beyond the veil for 60 million years, their inscrutable designs unfurling with glacial patience. This galactic war, the relentless rise of chaos, the horrifying awakening of the tyrannid hive fleets descending upon the galactic rim, might these cataclysms represent the very threats they so long anticipated. The burgeoning psychic awakening sweeping through sentient species could well be the first tremors of the Old Ones' programmed return, a calculated stirring of the latent psychic potential they seeded into their engineered children like the Eldari and perhaps, distantly, humanity itself, preparing the psychic battlefield before their own eventual reemergence to shepherd the galaxy's final defense against oblivion. Regardless of whether those pale, reptilian forms re-enter the fray, their ghostly hands clutch the very fabric of spacetime through the structures and species they birthed. The Webway network defies challengers as the ultimate conduit for interstellar movement. The beings they deliberately created or cultivated continue to stand as dominant, terrifying powers, shaping their own galactic empires. The psychic spark they ignited within countless bloodlines surges anew in unpredictable ways, a volatile genetic inheritance that might yet ignite the fate of all existence. High above the teeming hive and echoing halls of the Imperial Palace on Terra, long before the artificial emulation of dawn would cast the faintest gray light into the highest spires, the scratch of Gaul Friar's quill ceased. A minute drop of ink, precise and dark as the void grasped beyond the void shield, completed the final coda to his decades-long chronicle. Exhaustion weighted his aged hand as he reverently laid the quill upon its rest, the small stone chamber around him having radiated a deepening chill as the oppressive Terran night wore on. The dim heating element beneath his recaf pot was stone cold. Its last bitter, fortifying drops consumed many hours past as he had wrestled with the profound closing passages concerning the old one's enduring, perplexing bequest. He sat encircled now only by the fragile sphere of light cast by the flickering oil lamp, the metronome rhythm of an antique chronometer on the desk edge, and the ragged whisper of his own breath. Pain, that familiar companion born of ancient bones and countless hours stooped over manuscripts, sang a different melody in that moment. It was the deep, heavy ache of completion, a worn-thin exhaustion transmuted into quiet triumph. Gaul carefully pushed his spectacles up the bridge of his nose, the lenses catching the lamplight, and reached for the small, salt-white jar of fine drying sand. As the granules hissed and scattered across the pristine page, creating fleeting constellations upon the wet ink, his mind drifted to shores immortal yet unimaginable to his terrestrial senses, to oceans casting waves cresting with starlight that would never ripple across his own toes. The cloying sweetness of burnt-out midnight incense threads lingered delicately in the air, weaving with the sharp scent of iron gall ink and the dry fragrance of the precious, aegis-potted parchment. Gaul watched the sand cascade like captured moonlight, and the stark lines of his script emerge with satisfying clarity beneath it. The weight of the galaxy's primeval saga, pressed into the fiber of these pages by his own trembling hand, settled onto his soul. It was a profound solace, this act of custody, this tethering of the colossal past to fragile parchment. His hands, disfigured by age spots, yet moving with a gentleness entirely at odds with their appearance, gathered the loose sheaves, each one impregnated with bottled Eonsand, aligned their edges with painstaking care. The ritualistic rapping of the stack against the scarred surface of his desk resonated through the silence, a soft percussion beat refined by unending repetition over his long, dedicated service to the Imperium of man. He then drew forth the waiting leather binding, his fingertips exploring its cool, peculiar texture, tracing the subtle imperfections and creases that made it not just a cover, but a unique skin to hold unique history, genuine and imperfect beneath its authority. Binding the folios became an ingrained act of devotion. The thick bone needle slid through the prepared holes with a dancer's ease born of near-total physical memory, guided by his dimmed vision with a paradoxical certainty. A melody without words, the ghost of a folk tune swallowed by the distances of childhood, vibrated almost silently in his throat as he worked. The final knot secured, Gaul lifted the bound manuscript, feeling its satisfying heft settle into his palms. Enclosed within layers of worked hide and processed pulp lay the chronicles of entities who sculpted the spiral arms when humanity's ancestors wandered savannas, kindling the first sparks against the hungry dark, entities whose vanished wills resonated through the destiny of every species sharing the galactic stage. The scale was crushing, an infinite weight laid upon the fragile construct of the Imperium, shrinking even its vaunted glories to flickers in the cosmic gale. Gaul rose stiffly, joints grinding protests after the long vigil at his pulpit of knowledge. He shuffled to the cot nestled against a cold stone wall, the narrow bed that held the murmurs of countless dreams spun from galactic chronicles and glimpsed civilizations turned to stellar ash. The manuscript found a temporary home on the small table beside it, dwarfing a worn chronometer and a cheap lithograph icon. Removing his spectacles, he lodged them securely within their time-policed leather case. Beside them, with 3 deliberate, meticulously observed rotations of the winder key, he activated the chronometer's microscopic gear train not 2 turns, not 4, but the stipulated 3 the tiny ritual performed nightly since before the setting of his homeland's primary star. From beneath his pillow came the cool touch of sweet griswoven Fenrisian wool, the folded blanket placed expectantly. Then, drawing out the small, roughly cast icon of the Emperor's profile, Gaul was far removed from the fires of zealous orthodoxy, but decades spent sifting history's decaying faith itself had instilled in him a scholar's quiet respect for the fundamental human hunger for a witness to existence, a testament. The thumb pressed upon the cold metal surface briefly touched his furrowed brow, a personal salute to colossal, clashing ideals entangled with a necessary figurehead before the icon returned to its appointed sanctuary. Settling onto the cot's meager comfort, a reward to gravity-weak limbs after the desk-bound incarceration, Gaul could survey his microcosm. Shelves straining under indices of forbidden inquiry, the desk awash in the debris of his life's labor, the modest altar bearing tokens of loves extinguished, faces blurred by time. His hand stretched towards the oil lamp's glass chimney. Before extinguishing the flame, his gaze lingered once more on the manuscript. Dawn would herald the arrival of an Inquisition adept, bearing the unseen expectation and the silent threat. The precious cargo would be seized, dissected, assessed, truths excised, or the entire work consigned to purifying fire deemed too volatile, too heretical for fragile human minds. But here now, engulfed by the profound silence shielding his inadequate sanctuary, the history endured whole. Absent masters and galaxy-shaping tragedies pulsed complete within pages shaped by mortal fingers stained with the ink of obsession. The lamp surrendered to his soft exhalation, plunging the room into absolute, velvet shadow torn only by the slivered line of invasive luminescence slipping under the door. In that pervasive nothingness, Gaul discovered an unexpected resonance, a kinship shared with the vacant starlit vastness the old ones once navigated as easily as breathing. His adjusted sight conjured the night sky, each point of light a stoic witness to the unfathomable sweep of history, objectively recording the same ancient beams observed by the timeless reptilian gazes whose machinations filled his manuscript. Sleep approached Gaul Friar not as a thief stealing time, but as a patient guide harvesting him from the confines of chill stone, bearing him weightless towards destinations unknown. Dreams unfurled with a startling clarity, crystalline structures refracting alien starlight across impossible geometries, pathways inscribed through the dimensional shoals roaring with chaotic tides, distant intellects surveying creation with an indifference forged in the furnace of cosmic ages. Cold wisdom washed over him, immense and distant, yet threaded with the patient examination he understood implicitly. In sleep as in waking hours buried beneath dust and arcane lore, he sought more than knowledge's sterile catalog. He yearned for comprehension, the intrinsically human struggle to impose narrative order upon a cosmos whose relentless immensity reduced species to dust motes in the stellar wind. And perhaps, drifting on the tides of slumber and half-recalled scholarship, Gaul sensed a phantom acknowledgement. Perhaps the watchful, vanished architects themselves, specters clinging to the memory-saturated ether within the Webway's insulated arteries, or trapped within the psychic latticework they wove, perceived this solitary human hunched over traces of their epic. Endless nights spent preserving echoes of their lost dominion, ink-stained, aging hands tending frail vessels carrying immense histories, this deep, quiet commitment to conservation against the universal attrition of time. They might have recognized in Gaul Friar's weary devotion to ghosts their own ancient, disciplined purpose, the fundamental drive to know, to guard fiercely against oblivion, to ensure understanding survived. Silent in the eternal dark space beyond stars, where the psychic resonance of the war in heaven still vibrates like fractured glass 60 million years silenced, perhaps they approved. This shambling keeper of crowded silence, this humble warden of fragile vellums inscribed with cosmic legacy, holding the dimming torch just a little longer against the absolute, insatiable night.